This story starts in a school, where we find a girl lost in thought about her brother. Her moment of contemplation is suddenly interrupted when another girl bursts into the classroom, frantically calling for everyone's attention. She excitedly announces that she's just seen the cutest guy in the office. Apparently he's a new transfer student and a third year. As soon as the girl from before hears this, she realizes it must be her brother. Before we dive deeper into the story, the girl narrates that her brother was thought to have died in a plane crash with their parents, but miraculously, he returned after 10 long years. When she saw her brother for the first time, she could hardly believe her eyes. Their grandpa had the same reaction. Upon seeing him alive, when her brother looked at her, she was startled, but he just smiled in response and asked if she was his sister. Suddenly, Dae-on is yanked out of her flashback by a bunch of girls trying to bully her. These troublemakers demand that she hand over the gym uniform she's brought with her. Dae-on tries to reason with them, pointing out that if she gives up her uniform, she won't have anything to wear. Blondazilla just snickers at this, and then starts yelling at her. She's so loud that even the other girls in the classroom can't ignore the commotion she's causing, for no good reason. Blondazilla finally crosses the line and smacks Dan on the head, making it clear that she better hand over the uniform, or else she won't be nice to her anymore. While I wouldn't exactly call slapping someone on the head being nice, I guess no one is about to argue with this over-the-top Blondezilla. Even the other girls in the classroom just look away, not wanting to get involved or stop her from getting all high and mighty. It looks like Dae-on has no choice but to face the humiliation and silently comply with the demand. The next scene takes us to third-year class 2, where the entire class is being introduced to this new, handsome fella who is just transferred into the school. The teacher mentions that he's been living overseas for a long time and asks everyone to be friendly and help him settle in. All the girls in the class can't help but blush at how hot he is. Even the bullies in the room can't resist sneering, while the other students with average looks feel a pain of jealousy at the new guy's good looks. The teacher directs him to an empty seat at the back of the room, and he makes his way over, ready to get settled in his new spot. As the new guy walks to his seat, we spot a redhead guy named Jae-hung, and we can tell that he is feeling absolutely annoyed. Let's face it, he's just jealous that this new guy is stealing the spotlight with his looks. The big guy seated behind Jae-hung gives a subtle signal. Jae-hung quickly catches on to what his friend is trying to say and decides to take action. He extends his foot out, aiming to trip the new guy as he walks by, but Jae-hung's plan doesn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped, because this new guy quickly halts, leaving Jae-hung gritting his teeth in frustration. He had timed his foot extension perfectly, but it still didn't work at all. Meanwhile, the new guy, who goes by the name Jin by the way, just gives Jae-hung a death glare for his pathetic attempt, though he does not say a word. The scene then flashes back to Jin's past, where we see a blonde guy advising Jin to avoid getting into fights. Once he returns to Korea, Jin lets out a sigh and responds that he's already aware of this much. The senior perks up to hear this and curiously asks about how Jin knows. Jin then explains that he wouldn't enter any combat situation without having enough intel about his surroundings. Well, it looks like Jin's response isn't exactly what the senior was expecting to hear, because it sounds way too hardcore. But Jin continues, sharing his wisdom from years of experience. He explains that making a rash decision could cost him his life, and such a mistake would be a rookie move. This makes the senior even more uncomfortable, and our boy goes on to remind his senior that he has survived plenty of battlefields over the past 10 years because he knows his stuff. Suddenly, Major Kong, the senior, tells Jin to stop and clarifies that he wasn't referring to all this strategic nonsense, but rather he does not want our boy to engage in fights because he wants to prevent the poor offender from getting beaten up badly. In the present moment, Major's advice lingers in our boy's mind, so he does not say anything to the bully. In order to avoid fighting, the teacher then notices Jin standing there idly and asks if everything's okay. Jin simply flashes a pleasant smile, saying he is good, and continues past Jae-hung. Ignoring him, Jae-hung snickers once again, thinking Jin is just a wimp afraid of getting picked on. Even the guy who tried to trip him earlier smiles, pleased with Jin's reaction. Once Jin reaches his seat, the teacher tells one of the students to help him get ready for the first class. With that, the teacher leaves. After wishing Jin a good time studying, the student sitting next to Jin quickly introduces himself as Yang-chan Park, and our boy returns the gesture, introducing himself as Ejin Yu. Yang-chan then nervously glances over his shoulder to make sure no one's watching, and leans in to whisper to our boy that he saw what Jae-hung was trying to do. He explains that Jae-hung Lee is a troublemaker, but there's also another bully to watch out for, which is Hyuk Jinju, who's just as bad. Jin takes a closer look at both of the troublemakers, while Yang-chan further reveals that the next class is math. Jin thanks his new friend for the heads up, and Yang-chan is relieved to see that our boy isn't just another bully. He tells our boy to feel free to ask him anything, and he'll do his best to help out. The math teacher arrives and instructs everyone to open their textbooks. He starts solving math problems on the board. Some students are busy taking notes, while others look utterly bored. Jin takes in the scene, noticing that Yang-chan is diligently paying attention, while some students are dozing off or messing around on their smartphones. He also glances out the window and sees a group of students playing in the playground. Jin's mind drifts back to his days as a mercenary. He remembers the heavy rain, feeling utterly exhausted and battered, the chaos of his past life, the constant roar of guns and explosions, seems to have left a permanent mark on his mind. Yet in the present moment, as he closes his eyes, there's no unpleasant noise. Everything feels unexpectedly peaceful and serene. As dawn approaches, students start heading home. Among them is Dion, who spots her brother standing nearby. She's momentarily startled and asks if he's been waiting for her. He replies that yes, he was hoping to walk her home. However, he adds that if she has other plans, she's welcome to go on her own. Dion quickly glances around and insists she has no other plans, but we can tell that she is still really anxious about walking with our boy. Jin then states that if she doesn't have anything pressing, they'll walk home together. Eventually, the girl agrees. Later on the street, the siblings walk side by side, both clearly feeling awkward. Jin tries to break the ice and asks if she's feeling awkward too. Dion is startled to hear this and quickly insists she's not awkward at all. But Jin reassures her that it's okay, as he's feeling pretty awkward himself. Thankfully, this remark finally makes our girl relaxed a bit. Jin then reveals that he was only 9 at the time of the accident, so he doesn't remember much about his remaining family, including his sister. He points out that it must be pretty strange for her, too, since she was only 7 and probably doesn't remember much. Either Dion stays silent because this is, in fact, true just then. She suddenly hears some familiar voices around the corner and her feet suddenly come to a halt. When Dion looks at the source of the voice, she spots one of the girls who bullied her in class. She is apparently the friend of that blonde girl who slapped Dion in the school today. The bully girl immediately notices Dayan and calls her out. Dayan breaks into a sweat, feeling uncertain about how she is going to handle the situation. One of the guys sitting with the bully girl asks who Dayan is. The bully girl reveals that Dayan is the girl Hoojin dislikes, and Hoojin is the same blonde girl who slapped her. Earlier, the bully girl also spots her brother walking along with Dayan and starts teasing her, asking if she's out with her boyfriend. She adds some colorful remarks, saying she didn't know bitches could date as well. Our girl quickly gets timid and frantically tries to reassure her that Jin is just her brother. Well, this comes as a surprise to the bully girl, who didn't know Dion had a brother. After hearing the rude comments, Jin asks Dion if this girl is a friend of hers. Dion timidly agrees and admits they know each other from their homeroom. But the cocky girl doesn't let up, calling Dion a bitch again and asks since when they became friends. Dion trembles as the bully continues her rant. Jin then gives the girl a cold stare, one that's enough to freeze the hell itself. The guy sitting next to the bully girl doesn't appreciate Jin's sharp glare. He gets annoyed and warns Jin to watch himself if he doesn't want to get his ass yanked. Jin continues to glare, which only annoys the fatty more. The bully girl starts egging him on and provokes him to pick a fight with Jin. Eventually, the fatty's patience wears thin, and he strides over to our boy, and Jin quickly shoves Dion back and gets face to face with this stupid head. The fatty demands to know if Jin is trying to act tough in front of his sister. Jin notices how defenseless the fatty is, standing so close, and leaving himself wide open, but then Major Kang's words echo in his mind once again, which reminds him to not pick fights with anyone. Jin lets out a sigh, averts his gaze and decides to walk away quietly. But Fatty isn't letting Jin off the hook so easily. He grabs Jin by the collar and raises his hand, ready to deliver a sharp slap to Jin's face. Before he can make contact, Diane rushes to intervene. She quickly bows down her head and explains to the bully that Jin has been living overseas for most of his life and isn't used to the way things work in Korea. On the other hand, the bully girl snickers to see her begging, while Dion continues to tremble with fear. The fatty, however, snaps at Dion, saying he doesn't care if Jin was living overseas or not. Seeing his sister so terrified and shaking in fear boils Jin's blood. Fueled by anger, he grabs Fatty's wrist and yanks it. Fatty squirms in pain even though Jin hasn't done anything particularly aggressive. Jin throws his bag down and takes off his school coat. Calmly, he tells his sister to wait for him and covers her face with the coat, assuring her it won't take more than a minute. Just then the rowdy thug charges at him from behind. Jin effortlessly twirls around and delivers a solid slap to the thug's face. The single slap sends the thug staggering, blood spilling from his mouth as he stumbles backward and crashes to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The cocky girl and the other goon feel a chill run down their spines, and I can tell they are about to crap their pants if our boy continues like this. Meanwhile, Jin lets out a sigh of disappointment, knowing he's broken his promise to Major Kong. But I guess this is not his fault entirely, as this fatty bastard had this coming. The other goon is so terrified that he has started to reconsider making any move against our boy. The next scene takes us to the countryside, where military soldiers are training tirelessly. Among them is Major Kong, overseeing the rigorous exercises. A fellow soldier approaches from behind and reminds Kong that today is Jin's first day at school. Hearing this, Major Kong gets concerned that, despite 6 months of lessons on leading a normal life, Jin might struggle to adapt to his normal school life after so many years as a mercenary. But still, Kong feels a sense of pride, and he's confident that the lessons he imparted to Jin will help him thrive in his new life. Well, it turns out Major Kang's teachings didn't quite do the trick, because Jin is making these bullies look like yesterday's trash. The other bullies watch in shock as the injured fatty lies unconscious, eyes rolled back. The bully girl and her sidekick are shaking with fear as Jin strides toward them. In a flash, Jin lunges and lands a devastating punch right in the gut of the other thug, sending him flying and crashing to the ground. The cocky girl's jaw drops in disbelief when Jin turns his attention to her. His death glare makes her tremble with fear. Dayan pulls the coat off her face, her hands trembling as she takes in the sight of the two thugs, down for the count even though it's only been a minute since she was covered. Jean notices his sister watching him, and, after giving the cocky girl one last intimidating look, he walks away from her. He turns to Dayan and apologizes for covering her face so abruptly. The apology only makes Dayan feel more awkward, so Jin tries to lighten the mood by suggesting they grab some snacks from her favorite store. Dayan stammers that it's okay and they don't need to, so Jin decides they should just head home. As Dayan and Jin cozy up, the bully girl is left terrified to see this. She's completely blown away by how this guy, who was so terrifying with just a glare, is now acting like a sweet, caring brother. As the siblings walk off together, Diane gives her one last, friendly wave before they head out, and this only makes her curious about her brother, since he doesn't seem like the type to pick fights. She then explains that in Korea, staring at people like he did can be considered rude and might lead to uncomfortable situations. Jin agrees, adding that meeting someone's gaze can be risky, depending on who you're staring at, which is similar to where he's from. Confused, Dion asks why he stared at those thugs earlier. Jin simply replies that he noticed she was scared, and he wanted to protect his sister. Dion is startled by these unexpected responses, and she simply bows her head down while blushing. An awkward silence falls between them as they continue walking. It looks like Dion will need to get used to having a caring brother around to look out for her. When they get back to the apartment, we see Grandpa is a bundle of nerves. He frantically tells Jin to just chill and enjoy some fruit. But our boy insists on taking care of the dishes himself. Grandpa's not sure how to handle this, so he eventually lets Jin take over. As Jin washes up the dishes with a steady hand, Grandpa asks if the dinner was okay, admitting he's not exactly a master chef. Jin, keeping it casual, tells Grandpa not to sweat it. He says the food has been great, and he's loved every meal. The old man looks visibly relieved to hear that Jin enjoyed the food. You can even see the glimmer of satisfaction on his face. Grandpa then turns to Dion, asking if she liked the food as well. She nods and agrees. Next, Grandpa shifts gears and asks Jin about his first day of school, and he is curious to know if anything interesting happened. Jin hesitates for a moment, looking a bit anxious about answering. Dion also feels a bit uneasy, reflecting on how eventful the day has been. But after a moment of pause, Jin admits that it was a good day. Grandpa's face lights up with genuine pleasure at hearing this, clearly relieved and happy. Once everyone hits the bed for the night, we find our guy still wide awake. His mind flashes back to when his grandpa first saw him, and he can almost feel how grateful his old man was to have him around. Jin's cold heart has slowly started to warm up after living with his grandpa and sister for a while. Then his thoughts drift to the time he was stuck on that airplane. Before it crashed, passengers were in a panic, and the emergency oxygen masks had popped out of the compartments. As everyone scrambled to put on their masks, Jin's parents focused on making sure their son could breathe safely. It was a terrifying day for him. Just as the plane began its downward plunge, Jin jolts awake in the present, leaping out of bed in shock and breathing heavily from this nightmare. His heart is racing, and he finally realizes it was just a dream. He glances at his clock and sees that morning has arrived. As he sits there alone, he hears rattling noises coming from the living room. He stands up and goes out, only to find his sister preparing breakfast for the day. He looks around and asks where Grandpa went. She tells him that Grandpa left for work at dawn. She explains that Grandpa took time off to be home when Jin arrived, but now his paid holidays are over, so he's back to work. She also puts on her uniform, and once she's done, she decides to leave for the day. She tells Jin that breakfast is laid out on the table, and reminds him to make sure he eats. With that, she heads out, and Jin glances back at the spread of food left for him. Back at school, we see the same bully girl and the blonde girl Hoojin. It turns out Hoojin has discovered that the transfer student from yesterday is Dion's brother. The bully girl anxiously confirms this. Her mind flashes back to their previous encounter with Jin, and she feels devastated, remembering how he knocked out two of her friends with just one punch. Wei Jin tries to ask why the bully girl is so scared, but the bully girl remains frozen in fear, unable to speak. I have grown tired of calling her a bully girl, so let's just give her an appropriate name, and let's call her Chicken Shake. From this point onward, Hoojin continues to press Chicken Shake about what happened. Finally, Chicken Shake swallows her fear and says they should stop picking on Daeon from now on. The glare Jin gave her is still burned into her mind, and she can't shake it off. Despite her fear, she tries to reassure herself that everything will be fine because Hoojin and her brother are basically the top dogs, and everyone at school bows down to them. After a while, we see Dion again. As usual, she gets brutally smacked on the head. When she turns around, she sees Hoojin and Chicken Shake together once again, there to bully her. Dion quickly asks what they both want now, to which Hoojin tells her to come with her for a second. Our girl asks where they are going. The cocky blonde is clearly ticked off, and snaps at Daeon, telling her not to get too big for her boots, and to follow orders if she doesn't want to get beaten down. She adds that having a brother isn't going to change a thing. A little while later, we find ourselves at the school's recycling station, where Dion is getting absolutely pummeled by the cocky blonde. After a few solid kicks, the blonde tells Dion to keep her head down. Dion, trying to catch her breath, asks why she's getting beaten up in the first place. That's when Ouija reminds her about her brother. She tells Dion that her brother doesn't have to act like a tough guy, and warns her to explain to her brother to stop getting so full of himself. She further makes it clear that they won't be responsible for Dion's brother anymore because he's in for one hell of a ride. Dion, still clueless, asks if that means they're targeting her brother. From now on, Hoojin quickly confirms, reminding her that the two bullies our boy took down were friends of her brother. Since Dayan and her brother dared to mess with them, they're not going to get off easy. It's like poking a lion and expecting not to get mauled. Dayan's face goes absolutely pale upon hearing this. She yells at the two thugs, demanding to know what they're planning to do with her brother, but all she gets in response is a solid slap across the face for speaking out of turn. The slap leaves a bruise on her cheek, but the sting of the physical pain is nothing compared to the ache she feels, knowing her brother is in serious trouble. Dayan clenches her jaw, steels herself and bolts out of the recycling station, leaving the two thug women behind. The scene cuts back to third-year class 2. The atmosphere is thick with anxiety. Even the two average bullies in the class are unusually quiet. Everyone's on edge because the school's biggest bully is strolling into the classroom with his entourage, and it looks like the drama with Jin is about to kick off big time. But Ginger sits there cool as a cucumber. The two bullies who got knocked down yesterday are also strolling down with their boss behind them. The biggest bully of all, the top dog, looms large right on cue. Dying bursts into the room like a tornado. She's panting heavily, her face is bruised, and her uniform is smeared with dirt. Jin abruptly stands up from his seat, and his eyes widening in shock as he takes in the sight of his sister's battered face and filthy uniform. The bully boss starts up with some banter, teasing how Jin's sister is worried sick about her brother. He points out how his own sister, Wei Jin, all she does is whine and nag at him to do things for her. Wei Jin also strolls into the scene and reminds her brother that she will only feel sorry when her brother actually gets his ass handed to him by someone. Meanwhile, Jin is left visibly petrified, seeing his sister so bruised up. But before we can see his reaction, the scene cuts back a little to the past, when students were just starting to gather in the classroom early in the morning. We see the terrified face of young Chan, taking hits to the head from two rowdy individuals who are using his face for target practice. Jae-hung is feeling pretty cocky about his direct headshot and brags to his friend about it. Ik-chan then gets ticked off and demands this nearby student to hand over his eraser. Once the timid student offers his eraser, Ik-jin quickly takes it. He swings his hand with all his might and delivers a precise headshot to Yongchan. He breaks into a happy dance after landing the perfect hit, but Jae-hung tries to downplay it, saying this was just a lucky shot. The two friends go back and forth, trying to outdo each other with their headshot skills. Jae-hung decides to take another shot, and the eraser falls to the ground. Jin then takes his seat right next to the terrified Young-chan. The redhead is visibly ticked off. Feeling Jin is finally getting on his nerves, Kyok-chen decides to talk some sense into Jin for stepping in, and the redhead quickly agrees. Meanwhile, our boy simply puts his bag on the desk and asks Young-chan if he's all right. The poor fella mutters that he is fine, but we can tell by his pale face he is not fine at all. Young-chan simply leans toward our boy for avoiding any eye contact with those bullies and asks our boy if they should hang out after school. Jin reveals that he has to walk home with his sister, so he can't hang out. The timid boy perks up at this and asks if his sister transferred here with him. Jin shakes his head, saying she was already studying here before he arrived. When Young-chan asks her name, Jin tells him it's Dion. Young-chan is startled to hear this, and Jin notices his sudden reaction, so he asks his friend if he knows her. At first, Young-chan feels reluctant to say anything, but admits that Dion isn't having the best time at school lately. He explains that she was quite popular back in middle school for being smart and pretty, which attracted a lot of attention from the guys. But then a blonde girl named Wei Jin, who was jealous, started bullying her. Jin asks if no one stopped them from bullying Dan. Young-chen reveals that the girl who used to bully her, Wei Jin, has a brother named Gisu Kim, who's one of the worst troublemakers at their school. What's even worse is that Dion is stuck in the same homeroom as Hoojin, and she gets bullied to the point where every student is amazed that she still has the courage to come to school. Jin puts two and two together and realizes that Hoojin started bullying his sister just because someone liked Dion, and that's the only reason she's being targeted. But Young-chan somberly reveals that this is just an excuse, because Wejin simply wanted a reason to bully someone. Jin's mind flashes back to several days before, when his grandpa hoped that Jin would have an easier time adjusting to his new school after living overseas for so long. The grandpa then turns to his granddaughter and asks if she's doing well in school too. At that time, little Dion, charmingly, assures her grandpa that she's doing absolutely fine, and never shows a hint of the grievances she faces at school on a daily basis. Her grandpa praises her, noting that Dion is always a brilliant student, and even her teachers speak highly of her. In the present moment, Jin realizes that his sister was just putting on a brave face and hiding her struggles to keep their grandfather from worrying. Then one of the rowdy bullies kicks the door open, and the entire gang of school bullies saunters into the classroom. Yokshin quickly asks these rowdy bunch what they're doing in their class. Kisu Kim, one of the top dogs of the entire school, just says he's there to handle some business. He OCJIN, surprised to see Gisu and is not sure what to do. You see, he OCJIN is a small fry. While he can deal with the other bullies pretty fine, but he doesn't want to get tangled up with Gisu Kim. Meanwhile, Jisu's lackeys inform him about Jin. When Gisu sees Jin, he starts shouting at his lackeys. Furious that they got their butts kicked by a scrawny little punk, he dismisses his lackeys and provocatively flicks his finger at Jin, telling him to come over. Jin stands up immediately, while the redhead and Hyok Jin look totally confused about what Jin did to take off Gisu, and they're pretty sure he is pretty much screwed now. Meanwhile, Jin stands his ground defiantly and asks if Gisu is actually the big shot here. Gisu sneers, and he finds it fascinating that our boy took his sweet time to figure out who is in charge here. He turns to his lackey and tells him not to just stand there like an idiot and to make a move, but we can clearly tell that the lackey is absolutely scared. But he eventually steps forward towards Jin. But before the showdown starts, Daeon also bursts into the classroom, breathing heavily in the current time. This is how Jin finds himself, looking at his bruised-up sister. Tears well up in Daeon's eyes as she starts apologizing to Jin for putting him into trouble. Meanwhile, Wei Jin scoffs after seeing those tears and calls her the biggest drama queen ever. Jin, however, tells his sister she has nothing to apologize for. Before she can say another word, he loses it and slaps this lackey across the face with such force that he hits the ground knocked out cold. The other bullies, who already know how hard Jin can hit, start to tremble with one lackey down. Jin turns to his sister and says that these bullies are the ones who should be apologizing. The fatty charges at Jin with a clenched fist, but Jin effortlessly pushes his hand away when he spots the exposed throat. Jin delivers a brutal, precise smack to it like a ninja, leaving the bully spitting and coughing before collapsing to the floor. The other lackey, shaking with fear, tries to land a hit on Jin. Jin responds with a crushing blow to his ribs, and with lightning-fast reflexes, sends the lackey tumbling to the ground. Meanwhile, Geese, whose confidence has finally started to fade away as he sees our boy effortlessly taking down his bullies like they're nothing, the local lackeys of this class, who are still in their beta stage, stand there wide-eyed and expressionless. Even Hoojin and Chicken Shaker freaking out, completely losing their composure. After taking down the last two bullies, Jin turns to Gisu and makes it clear that his sister has been suffering because of these thugs, and he's not about to stand for it. Guess who finally decides to speak, sneering, as he admits that Jin is not a pushover after all. With a smirk, guess who swings his leg with lightning speed toward Jin's face. But Jin effortlessly blocks the kick, leaving Gisu absolutely stunned, because he did not expect our boy to react so fast. Nonetheless, Gisu quickly swings his other leg, which is also blocked by Jin quite easily. Jin seizes Gisu's leg, pulls him closer, and delivers a brutal punch to his face. The punch sends blood spraying everywhere, as Gisu crashes to the ground like a rag doll. His nose and mouth are bleeding, and he looks up in horror at Jin, who towers above him like a goddamn Death Reaper. Without hesitation, Jin swings his leg again, striking the bastard in the face with a powerful kick that sends more blood splattering. The guy who was once cocky and full of himself finally hits the ground, defeated and humiliated. The entire class falls silent, eyes wide in shock, as they watch Jin take down one of the biggest bullies in one fell swoop. The two beta bullies are slack-jawed as well, unable to believe that our boy just took down a major player like Jezu so effortlessly. The girls are equally horrified, with the blonde especially stunned, unable to fathom if Jin is really this formidable. Jin starts walking towards Wei Jin, who is feeling terrified because she does not want to get slapped and face the same brutal treatment. But before anything else can happen, Diane rushes to stop her brother, pleading with him not to do anything anymore. Jin reminds her that Hoojin and her crew have been bullying her for a long time, and he also knows that she was targeted by them yesterday as well. Diane's face falls as she realizes her brother has uncovered the truth, and she bows her head in silence. She then suddenly realizes that Jin is fighting for her sake, so she quickly forces a smile, telling her brother that she's fine and he should stop. Her brother hesitates at first, but eventually agrees, deciding to walk her to class. As they leave, the students in the room erupt into murmurs, unable to believe that Gisu, the top dog, was taken down by a single boy. Even the beta bullies admit that Jin is hardcore, and they are feeling a wave of relief that they didn't try to take him on earlier. As the chatter continues, the blonde girl trembles, in a mix of fear and humiliation, unable to process her defeat. Meanwhile, as Jin and Dion walk together, she expresses her shock at how good her brother is at fighting, but then starts apologizing again. Confused, Jin asks what she's apologizing for. Dion explains that it was her fault. He got dragged into this mess. She feels responsible for the fights he had to endure both yesterday and today. Jin gives Dion a reassuring smile, telling her she doesn't need to apologize for anything, because this is what families are for, to protect each other. He then begins to explain that, back where he used to live, everyone only looked out for themselves. They didn't care what happened to others, as long as they weren't the ones suffering. But even those people would act differently when their own families were involved. That is when the scene cuts down into the memory lane, to a chaotic battlefield, with smoke and explosions tearing through the area. Gunfire and bombardments echo from both sides. In the middle of the madness, we see a younger Jin caught in the mayhem. Among the carnage, he spots one of the opposing soldiers, desperately trying to save his little daughter, shielding her from a man who is holding his gun right over their faces. Even in the middle of the violence, the sight of that soldier, risking everything for his child, left a deep impression on Jin. It made him question what family truly meant, and why it was so important in the current moment. Diane points out that he barely remembers her. So why is he still going out of his way to help? The boy agrees, admitting it's true, he doesn't remember her, but insists that doesn't change the fact that they're family. The girl just stands there in silence, but just as our boy's words sink inside her mind, she starts to feel a bit embarrassed. She quickly tells him she's fine, and that he should head back to his class. She points out that they're already at her homeroom, so she waves a final goodbye and vanishes, leaving the boy with a faint smile on his face. Back in his room, Jin is still the hot topic of conversation, and he's feeling a bit awkward with all the attention he is getting. The beta bullies then flash him a thumbs up, cheerfully asking what kind of lessons he got overseas, because he took those noobs down like they were yesterday's leftovers. They keep showering him with praise, but the boy just sinks into his seat, looking a bit overwhelmed. Even his friend Young Chun chimes in, saying he was actually pretty awesome, which brings a subtle smile to Jin's face. Meanwhile, we shift to the defeated goons, who are feeling pretty anxious after their embarrassing loss. Their boss in particular is still fuming, grumbling that there's something different about our boy, because he doesn't fight like your average third-rate thug. His sister tries to cheer him up, reminding him to stop sulking and pointing out that their loss was just a fluke, and Jin just caught them off guard. So she suggests they should try to catch him later. But the bullies stay silent, because they've learned the hard way that our boy is a powerhouse, not to be messed with still. The blondie reminds her that he's just one guy, and they shouldn't let some dude take us down like this. Her brother finally shuts her up, telling her if she's itching for a fight, she can go take on the boy herself, if she thinks it's so easy. Of course, Hoojin doesn't like the way her brother's talking to her, so she snaps back that he shouldn't take his frustration out on her just because he got his butt handed to him by some random guy. Her brother is absolutely furious, and it's clear Hoojin's words hit him hard. He is seething in anger because we all know that she is speaking some uncomfortable truth. Hoojin glares at him one last time, her eyes welling up with tears from the frustration of seeing her brother act like this quietly. She turns around and slams the door behind her as she leaves. As she stomps down the corridor, Chicken Shake catches up with her from behind. Meanwhile, Blondie is absolutely fuming. It's incredibly frustrating for her that all those bullies couldn't handle just one guy. She slams the door open as she storms into the classroom, and when she sees Dayan sitting in the classroom, she asks our girl that she must be feeling pretty lucky to have a brother now. She reminds her how she now can go to school without a care in the world and can just run to her big brother if she gets into trouble. Dayan doesn't say a word in response, which only makes Hugin more annoyed. She thinks Dayan is giving her the cold shoulder just because she has her brother around. She grits her teeth in frustration and makes it clear that she won't let Dayan do whatever she wants just because she has a brother. As dusk starts to settle, students begin heading home, and among the crowd is our girl. Looking pretty dejected, she's lost in thought, recalling the scene where her brother stood up for her and fought those thugs. She remembers him saying they're a family, and wonders if this means she can finally go to school without worrying about getting bullied. Her mind drifts back to her miserable days under Hujin's rule, where she was constantly bossed around and obeyed every command like a faithful dog. Whenever she tried to speak up for herself, she'd get slapped down suddenly. Her brother appears behind her and asks if something's bothering her. She is startled by the sudden call, but our boy reminds her that he'd called her a few times already, but she did not respond. The sister quickly says sorry, explaining she didn't hear him, and then asks if he was waiting for her again. The boy nods, saying he was, because he still doesn't know his way back home. So they start walking together, talking about how they should grab some groceries on the way, since Grandpa always gets super hungry when he's home late. As they walk side by side, that rowdy bitch stands behind them. She's looking utterly mad and just can't handle seeing the smile on our girl's face. This bitch is biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to make Dan forget how to smile. In the next scene, we see our duo is shopping around the store. The girl seems to be having a tough time choosing what to get, while people around the store are looking at our duo. Girls in the store can't seem to take their eyes off our boy, and Dayan can't help but notice how much attention he's drawing from the ladies. She knew he was popular at school, but it seems he stands out even outside of it. Out of curiosity, Dayan finally asks her brother if he's ever had a girlfriend back when he was overseas. The sudden question takes him by surprise, and he looks like he's never even heard of the term girlfriend before. Seeing his confusion, Dayan clarifies, saying she means a girl he might be dating. He simply replies that he hasn't had any, which prompts his sister to suggest that he should consider having a girlfriend, especially since he's always attracting girls like a magnet wherever he goes. The boys stay silent for a moment before saying that he's always been too busy to have time for a girlfriend. Dayan understands where he's coming from, especially since he's been busy adjusting to a new country. That's when the boy turns the question back on her, asking if she's ever had a boyfriend. The question catches her off guard, and she quickly replies that she hasn't had one either. When he asks why not, she just says she's been busy as well. When they finally get home, we see our boy has been gifted a Samsung Galaxy phone by his grandpa. He's a bit disappointed because he wanted an iPhone instead. Grandpa quickly educates his grandson that iPhones have lousy battery life, so it's better to use a Samsung instead, especially since all the kids nowadays have iPhones. It's kind of a funny jab, suggesting that having a Samsung might actually make him stand out. Dayan, on the other hand, is pretty excited because she wanted a Galaxy phone for herself, and she can tell it's the latest model. The boy starts playing around with the phone, while Grandpa reveals that he's already saved Dayan's and his own number in it. Dayan is surprised to find out that Grandpa saved the phone numbers himself, since she usually helps with stuff like that. Grandpa quickly clears it up, saying he got some help from the salesperson. He adds with a grin that he's heard how the younger crowd loves to unbox new things themselves, so we hoped our boy wouldn't mind that. He opened the box to save their numbers. In response, Jin quickly says he's totally fine with it. Grandpa then apologizes to Dayan, saying the store only had one of those phones, so he couldn't get one for her today, and reassures him it's no big deal, and they end up having a great dinner, chatting and enjoying their family time. Later that night, the boy is still playing around with his new phone, and he is really digging into the Galaxy experience. He starts to think, maybe Samsung phones aren't so bad after all, and could be even better than iPhones. The scene cuts to Major Kong, who's busy working at his computer. When his phone rings, he picks it up and sees it's Jin, who lets his senior know that he's got a new phone, and this is his new number from now on. The senior is a bit surprised by this news, and even the junior, standing behind him, asks if Major Kong didn't already give Jin a phone. Major Kong confirms that he did. That's when the senior gets tomato red with anger, pointing out that he had given Jin the most expensive iPhone they had. So, he is kind of furious that Jin has changed his phone. Already, the next morning arrives, and Jin comes out of a cozy shower, and notices his sister rushing out in her uniform. Before she leaves, Jin asks why she's heading out so early. She tells him she's actually running late, and bolts out without wasting any time. She also reminds him that dinner is already set up, so all he has to do is put the dishes in the sink. As she's rushing down the street, she glances at her phone, and is relieved to see that she'll make it on time. She had gotten delayed, because she wanted to make a delicious soup for Grandpa, and seeing him smile after eating it made it all worth it. She's just happy to do something nice for him. Her moment of happiness is abruptly cut short, when she gets a solid kick to her ribs, and crashes to the ground. Standing over her are 3 girls, all decked out in hoodies and masks. To hide their identities, the one at the front tells Dayan to watch where she's running, and accuses her of nearly breaking her ankle. It's clear these girls are just looking for trouble, and making excuses to pick a fight. They demand that Dayan apologize for her so-called blunder. The poor girl quickly nods and says she's really sorry, but the rowdy leader isn't satisfied, and slaps Dayan across the face, and insists she apologize like a whimpering dog. That's when one of the girls with a ponytail suggests they all head to a karaoke spot to blow off some steam. Another girl quickly agrees, saying that they definitely need to relax and have some fun. The ponytail girl crouches down to meet Dayan at eye level with a smug grin. She invites our girl to join them in their karaoke session, and she is sure that they are going to have a blast. There, the second Dayan hears that voice, she instantly recognizes that this is Hoojin Kim, and she is definitely here to make our girl's life miserable. Before she knows it, they're all at a dingy karaoke place. The manager, catching sight of these shady-looking girls, can't help but feel uneasy. A while later, we see the manager again, who is pacing nervously toward the room where those girls have their karaoke session. He mutters to himself about how rowdy kids have gotten these days, and wonders what kind of mess those ladies might have left behind. Because in their entire karaoke session, all he heard was loud screaming noises. The manager turns the lever and opens the door, only to find Dayan sprawled on the floor, clearly beaten up. Thankfully she's conscious and starts to slowly get up. She fumbles with her things, her hands shaking as she gathers her stuff. The manager is utterly confused to see this unexpected sight, and decides to call an ambulance, but Dayan flatly refuses and stumbles out the door. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, the teacher is taking attendance, and notices that Dayan is still missing. When the students confirm she's not there, everyone is confused since Dayan wouldn't just skip school without letting anyone know. In the background, Hoojin Kim is smirking, clearly pleased with herself. Chicken Shake turns to her friend and asks if she thinks Dayan will be okay. In response, Hoojin simply tells her friend not to panic. She reminds her that Dayan missing school has nothing to do with them. Chicken Shake nervously agrees, playing along and affirming that it's indeed true and has nothing to do with them. Finally, the school bell rings, signaling the end of the day. As usual, the boy waits outside for his sister, but he can't seem to spot her in the crowd of students. The crowd begins to thin out, and soon there's hardly anyone around, but his sister is still nowhere in sight. He waits for a bit, then pulls out his phone and tries calling her, wondering if she might have gone home already. Meanwhile, she's already back home, and her phone rings endlessly as her brother keeps calling, but she doesn't bother to answer and lets it ring. Eventually, the boy heads back home. His eyes immediately spot the sneakers she wears. Sitting over the doorstep, he pulls off his bag from over his shoulder and goes to her door, giving it a gentle knock and asking if she's inside. The girl quickly responds, and the brother feels a wave of relief, knowing she's indeed there. Dayan quickly asks if Jin waited outside the school today too. Jin no Diaz and mentions that he even tried calling her, but she didn't answer. The girl apologizes heartily, saying she must have been asleep. Jin picks up on the odd tone in her voice, and asks if he can come in for a second day. An quickly comes up with an excuse, saying she's in bed because she's not feeling well. Worried, Jin asks if it's something serious. She reassures him that it's just a slight fever, and that she'll be fine after some rest. Jin tells her to call him if she needs anything, and decides to head out, planning to grab some medicine for her. But Jin suddenly stops at the door, and notices that her sneakers are stained with blood. It doesn't take him long to realize something serious must have happened, since blood on her shoes isn't something you see every day. Once he pieces it together, he grabs the first aid kit, and heads into her room to tend to her injuries. She winces as he applies bandages to her bruised face. It seems Jin still doesn't know the full story. Dion tells him she fell down the stairs while trying to dodge a bicycle. However, Jin points out that her injuries seem quite severe for a simple accident, and asks if she doesn't want to see a doctor. She hesitates for a moment before insisting she's totally fine, I guess. Her hesitation to visit the doctor is understandable, because if she goes to the hospital, they'll discover the bruises aren't from a fall down the stairs. The scene then cuts to Dion's past, where we find ourselves in the principal's office. Dion is telling the principal that she was beaten up by Hoojin. However, Hoojin flatly denies the accusations. The police are also involved in the case, and Dion insists that Hoojin was the one who beat her up. She explains that Hoojin was wearing a mask and hat, but she recognized her voice and is certain it was her. Besides, Hoojin has a history of bullying her at school. But then Hoojin, with a sly smirk, asks how Diane can accuse her when she didn't even see her face. The principal questions Dayan if she saw the face of the person who assaulted her. Dayan responds once again that the assailant's face was covered, but she's sure it was Hoojin. At this point, Hoojin's mother bursts with anger. She angrily accuses Dan of calling the police and treating her daughter like a criminal over a ridiculous accusation. The principal tries to calm the furious mother down, but she refuses to listen and makes it clear that she won't calm down. Meanwhile, Hoojin's confidence crumbles as she realizes that no one seems to believe her, despite her certainty that Hoojin was the culprit. Even the police officers are skeptical. The mother demands that Diane apologize to her daughter immediately for the accusation, but our girl stands her ground and tells the woman that it was indeed her daughter who assaulted her. The arrogant mother is infuriated by this and decides she will take the matter up with Dion's parents. She demands our girl to bring her parents to the school right away. This just breaks Dion's heart. She feels tears streaming down her face involuntarily, while the villain who assaulted her laughs and walks away unpunished. In the present, she feels trapped in the same situation she faced in the past. She believes that raising her voice without solid proof is futile, and is determined not to offend her grandfather, who has always been a supportive figure for her. Suddenly, Jin notices her tense expression and puts his hand on her forehead, asking if she's really okay. The girl responds, albeit weakly, that she's fine. Jin points out that while her bones aren't broken, the bruises are pretty severe and will hurt for a few days. She nods and finds it surprising that he's actually quite good at this, patching up stuff, because she can tell the bandages are perfectly placed. She then becomes somber, remembering their grandfather. She's worried he might get upset about all this, especially since he has a weak heart. This news comes as a surprise to Jen, and the girl further reveals that their grandfather takes pills to regulate his heart health in response. Jin promises her that he'll make sure their grandfather won't catch whiff of this predicament, and tells her to just get some sleep. As he begins to walk away, she calls out to him from behind. With a pleasant smile, she thanks him for all his help, and Jin reciprocates with the same warm smile. But once he's gone, her smile fades. She wonders if she did the right thing by not telling him everything. She feels that there's nothing a couple of teenagers, like her and her brother, can really do about the situation. However, we all know that Jin isn't an ordinary teenager, and I wouldn't be surprised if he already knows who was behind her injuries. Later, we find ourselves in a club where the high-energy music is blasting, and people are buzzing in the middle of it all. We spot the boss bully Gisu Kim. He's gritting his teeth as he drinks and laughs with his boys. They're all discussing Jin and wondering how a single brat could manage to mess things up. For everyone, one thug speaks up, reminding everyone that their downfall was due to underestimating Jin. He insists that they can take him out easily if they plan ahead. Another goon agrees, emphasizing that they can't just let him get away with this. A third adds that Jin won't stand a chance against all of them. Despite their enthusiasm, their boss knows that taking Jin down won't be a walk in the park. He's still seething from the humiliating defeat, but doesn't want to let it slide. He puts his glass down in frustration and reluctantly agrees with his lackeys. He makes it clear that going one-on-one isn't their style, so they might think of a strategic plan to take our boy down with numbers. The lackeys grin like Cheshire cats, clearly excited about their plan. This rowdy bunch may think they've got it all figured out, but they're nothing more than a pack of hyenas, destined to get their come-up and from Jin, sooner or later, just as they're planning their next move. Guess whose phone rings? The caller ID shows it's from someone labeled Little Bitch. It turns out to be his little sister. And it seems like even Gisu agrees with us that she, indeed, is a bitch anyway. She starts yelling at him, asking why he's just sitting around at the club. Gisu tells her to either say what she wants, or he's hanging up. The girl insists that he owes her big time. Gisu confusingly asks what she's talking about. She then reveals that he roughed up Dion earlier today. She tells him they can't let the siblings get away with it, or they'll lose their authority in the whole school. Her brother, feeling a bit proud of his sister, tells her she did a good job. He reveals that they're also planning to get payback on Jin. Just then, someone walks into the club. As the bullies turn to see who it is, they realize it's Jin. He appears to be there to settle some business. Gisu gets absolutely furious at the sight of Jin, casually walking into his turf. But Jin just walks toward their table. With a calm demeanor, Gisu then feels somewhat relieved that they don't have to hunt Jin down anymore to get their revenge. However, Jin isn't there for a friendly chat either, and without wasting any time, he grabs one of the lackeys by the face and slams him down hard against the edge of the table. Another lackey charges at him, but Jin's hand moves so fast that his single punch shatters all the ribs of the attacker. The bully leader and his lackeys grit their teeth, seeing their goons go down. The rest of the crew charges at Jin, but my guy just stays cool as a cucumber. As they get close, he kicks one of them down effortlessly, like a true Sigma male. Next, he grabs this purple head and slams him down on the table with a brutal thud. While this purple head is cowering for his life, Jin doesn't stop there and slams this dude against the wall like a rag doll. Then he balls up his fist and delivers a devastating blow to the fatty's face. One of the thugs grabs a glass bottle and swings it at Jin, but my guy casually knocks the bottle from his hand and follows up with a brutal whack to his face, which leaves the thug bleeding his mouth out. Another bully charges from behind, but Jin ducks down, grabs his hand, twists it painfully, and then delivers a hard slap across his face. Jin throws the thug aside, and then grabs another lackey by the face. He smashes the guy's ugly mug right into his knee, breaking the thug's nose with a sickening crunch. With all the thugs down for the count, Gisu is left speechless, unable to process what's happening. Meanwhile, his sister is still on the line, and she quickly asks what's going on, because she has been hearing the loud commotion and chaos. Jin turns to Gisu with a chill in his, because as far as Jin remembers, he's already told Gisu to stay away from his sister. Gisu is absolutely boggled out of his mind to see how the tables have turned. It's kind of ironic that they tried to gang up on Jin, only to end up getting their own gang banged. Jin fought like a pro and wiped the floor with everyone in just a few seconds. Meanwhile, Jin continues to question Gisu, asking what his sister ever did to him. Gisu plays dumb, pretending he knows nothing, while secretly reaching for a glass on the table. He throws the glass at Jin with lightning speed, but Jin just steps back, casually, letting the glass shatter against the wall. As he stands there nonchalantly, Gisu grabs a bottle and swings it at him. Our boy steps back once again, avoiding the hit. But when Gisu swings the bottle once more, Jin knocks it out of his hand and counters with a punch, sending the contents of the bottle splattering everywhere. Gisu tries to swing his fist this time, but my guy responds with another brutal smack to the bastard's face, leaving his nose bleeding like crazy. Gisu stumbles backward, gasping for air after the hit, while Jin remains cool and composed. not even breaking a sweat. Jin then asks this bastard what twisted pleasure he gets from harassing a helpless girl. In a desperate move, Gisu grabs a bottle, shatters it, and aims the sharp pieces at Jin's chest. But our boy shows no fear, and he quickly slaps Gisu's hand hard, making the bottle drop. Then he grabs Gisu by the throat and squeezes, causing him to struggle for breath. Jisu's feet trip over themselves as he struggles helplessly, and Jin forcefully drives him to the ground. The bastard writhes and squirms, desperately trying to break free from Jin's iron grip, but my guy doesn't let up, his hand pressed firmly on Gisu's throat, ensuring the once cocky bully knows exactly who's in control now. Jin then leans in and asks Gisu what he should do with him. Gisu, barely clinging to consciousness after the brutal beating, can't muster a response. Jin delivers his final warning, making it clear this is the last time he'll spare him. He warns him to stay away from his sister and to keep Wei Jin, who is Gisu's sister, in check as well. He emphasizes that if he hears even a rumor about Gisu or Hujin bothering his sister again, he'll be back to finish what he started. To drive his point home, Jin tightens his grip on the bastard's throat even further, pushing him to the brink of unconsciousness. The bully is now desperate and on the edge, starts squirming and apologizing profusely. After that, Jin finally releases his grip, leaving Gisu gasping for air and coughing violently. As Jin walks out of the club, the staff inside exchange nervous glances, unsure of what just went down. Meanwhile, Wei Jin and her friend, Chicken Shake, are strolling down the street. Hujin has got a bad vibe and starts worrying that her brother might be in trouble. When they reach the club, they hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and it's Jin casually making his exit. Hujin is caught off guard and isn't sure what to do. She shouts for Jin to stop, thinking she can still play it cool, because no one can pin the blame of what she did today on, but Jin doesn't even slow down. Hujin, now really nervous, starts backing away, trips and falls hard on her butt. While she's rubbing her sore shoulder, Jin's phone rings. He checks it and sees it's his grandpa calling. After a quick chat, he simply turns around and just heads home quietly, leaving them curious about what he is even thinking. When Hujin enters the club room, the scene is a mess. Her brother and his lackeys are all battered and bruised. She immediately starts shouting at him, demanding to know how he got whooped by Jin again. But her brother, too exhausted to argue, cuts her off and tells her to stay the hell away from Dayan from now on. Weon, not grasping the seriousness of the situation, keeps pushing back, asking what the hell he's talking about. Her brother, visibly frustrated, finally loses it. He grits his teeth and yells at her to leave our boy, sister, the fuck alone, but Hujin doesn't back down and keeps shouting, questioning why he's so afraid of that bastard. That's the breaking point, and her brother snaps with his eyes blazing with anger. He makes it crystal clear that if she doesn't steer clear of Dayan, he'll make sure to mess her up himself. Yikes, these siblings have a seriously twisted way of dealing with each other. It's wild how casually they talk about screwing each other over. Weon is shaken by her brother's outburst, and she begins to tear up. We're back with our boy, who spots the grandfather once again. They sit down on a bench in the park. First off, Grandpa apologizes for pulling our boy away while he was having fun with his friends, but our boy says it's all good. The old man then gets a bit sad, mentioning that Dayan got injured, and our boy was the one who treated his injuries. Our boy confirms it, and the old man explains that her injuries are pretty serious, but she refuses to go to the hospital. He shares how tough it's been raising Dayan on his own. He never really knew how to raise a young girl and was always working hard to put food on the table, and he is just grateful she's come this far on her own. Grandpa reflects on all those years and says that, looking back, Dayan has given him so much, more than he's ever been able to give her. He lost everything in that accident, and Dan was the only thing that kept him going. After the plane crash took everything away from him, it breaks his heart to see her so hurt, and not even tell him the real reason behind it. He wonders if she thinks he's too old to understand. He mentions a saying about how kids become distant from their parents as they grow older, so it must be even harder for her to reach out to an old grandpa. But our boy quickly reassures the old man that he's just overthinking. He points out that it's clear how much Grandpa loves Dayan, and he's sure Dayan loves him just as much. He tells Grandpa to stop worrying so much and promises that he'll look out for her at school. Hearing this, The old man is finally a bit relieved, and genuinely happy, that Daeun has a brother-like figure in her life. The next scene shifts to Omnio Medical Examination Center. Inside we see Gisu with his injuries finally patched up. He's getting an earful from his father, who's clearly disappointed in him. His dad doesn't hold back, making it clear that Gisu deserves every one of those injuries because, as he puts it, if you're going to play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. The arrogant mother starts yelling at her husband, clearly outraged. She reminds him that their son is in the hospital, and this is all he has to say. She tells him to go find the brute who did this and yell at him. Instead, she also points out that the same brute busted Hugin's arm too. Honestly, it's a real mess. Hugin is a bitch to the point that she even pinned the blame of her own mishap on our boy. We all know that she tripped and banged up her shoulder. But instead of taking responsibility, she's blaming him for everything. The angry father finally calms down and lets out a deep sigh. The concerned mother tells her son to just focus on resting and recovering. As they start to leave, the mother grumbles about making the kid who hurt their son pay if she ever gets her hands on him. Once they're gone, guess who finally asks? His sister. Why she had to tell their parents everything. He explains that by doing so, she's just made things worse for him. He feels humiliated that people will think he ran to their parents like a whining brat after getting beaten up. His sister then asks how she was supposed to hide the fact that her brother was in the hospital and that her arm was broken. Guess who gets pretty ticked off and demands to know if Jin was the one who did this to her arm. She remembers how she tripped and fell, but she doesn't mention that to him. Instead, she just says that Jin was responsible. It's messed up how she's shifting the blame so shamelessly. She then quickly stands up and tells him to just stay here and get better. She says she'll make sure they realize once and for all who they're dealing with. Jisoo sits there, unsure if they should mess with our boy again. Meanwhile, we're back with their parents. The woman reveals that she's just spoken to Mr. Cha, but her husband asks why she's complicating things, and tells her to let the school handle it. The woman responds that it's Saturday already, and she doesn't want to sit back and twiddle her thumbs, waiting for them. She starts yelling, pointing out that the school won't deliver real justice for what was done to their kids, and they'll likely only settle for a suspension or expulsion at best. The husband continues to argue, saying she has no business going to Mr. Cha to handle this personally. The woman reveals that she already knows Mr. Cha and that he's been handling his dirty work for years. Meanwhile, Hoojin is eavesdropping and feeling pretty smug about her mother contacting Mr. Cha. She knows that Mr. Cha is the scary gangster who works for her father, and she's sure this will put an end to those troublemakers. Once and for all, the scene shifts to a rundown place where a man is fidgeting with his lighter, clearly on edge. Two goons walk by looking pretty disappointed. They grumble about being ordered by their boss to handle some teenage drama, and none of them are thrilled about it. Even the boss himself isn't thrilled about dealing with this kid's squabble. But hey, a job's a job, even if it means wading through a mess of teenage nonsense. The scene flashes back to a time where a luxury Mercedes is zooming down the road. Inside the car, Mr. Cha, the mafia boss, takes a call from the woman. She fills him in on how her daughter's hand got fractured and her son got beaten up by some teenager. She's insisting that he needs to handle it. Cutting back to the present, Mr. Cha is puffing out smoke from his cigarette, clearly fuming. He's beyond frustrated that he has to deal with this kind of nonsense. As well, the scene transitions back to the quarters, where our boy is sitting before his computer, still lost in thought about his encounter with the GISU. He's wondering if these guys are really going to let it go. Suddenly the doorbell rings. He hears his grandpa arguing with someone at the door. It turns out that the people at their doorstep want to see Jin. The intimidating man outside claims they just want to talk to Jin for a bit. Grandpa, concerned about the late hour, questions what could be so urgent. Our boy steps out of his room, telling his grandpa that he'll be back soon after he hears what they want. Despite Grandpa's reluctance and even his sister's protests, Jin flashes a pleasant smile. He reassures them that he knows these guys and that it's just a quick chat, nothing to worry about. With that, our boy leaves his concerned grandpa behind. The goons take him to an abandoned construction site, and he wonders who they might be taking him to meet. When they finally arrive, the lackeys report to their boss that they've brought the guy in question. The boss remains silent, puffing on a cigarette. The bald lackey reveals that the kid caught on quickly, didn't make a fuss, and just came along. The boss, a bit surprised and pleased, decides to make it quick. He snaps his fingers, and the lackeys immediately grab their iron bats. One lackey tells his friend to hold our boy's arm, as he'll be the one to dish out the beating. Meanwhile, the boss sighs and decides to text the mother, letting her know that he's taken care of the job. While the boss scrolls through his phone, looking for that mother's number, the lackeys ask him why our boy had to mess with the kids of Kim family. As soon as our boy hears the mention of kids, he realizes this must be about Gisu Kim. The boss, feeling frustrated and annoyed, pauses his scrolling, deciding he shouldn't call her while our boy is present. However, he looks over at our boy and is intrigued by how unfazed and emotionless he appears. Just as the lackeys charge at him, Jin suddenly uses his ninja-like speed. He grabs the bald lackey's hand before he can swing at him and pushes the man toward him, delivering a brutal shoulder smash right to the lackey's face. The boss watches this with his wide-eyed eyes as he witnesses this flawless execution of the move. Meanwhile, the other lackey, bat in hand, swings at our boy. He ducks, letting the bat swoosh harmlessly over his head, but the lackey tries another swing, but our boy charges at the bat as if it's no big deal, leaving the mafia boss utterly bewildered. With lightning speed, our boy locks the baseball bat in his arm and delivers a brutal punch right under the lackey's chin. Not stopping there, he follows up with a devastating blow to the lackey's chest. Then with a fierce grip, he grabs the lackey by the neck and throws him down onto the bricks below. The boss watches in shock, clearly impressed and flabbergasted by the sheer skill and audacity of our boy's moves. The bald lackey grabs our boy from behind, threatening him with death. But our boy quickly jabs his shoulder into the lackey's ribs and then delivers a solid shoulder smash to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Mr. Chow realizes that this kid is no average teenager. Because his combat skills are exceptional, he finally decides to step in himself. As he strolls forward, he scratches his head, snickering and commenting that he never thought he'd be fighting teenagers at his age. Meanwhile, our boy can tell that even though this man is a mafia boss, he still is a weak sauce, because my guy can clearly spot all of the weak spots of this man. As the boss swings a powerful fist at him, Jin effortlessly sidesteps it. The boss then starts a barrage of punches, but our boy dodges each one with ease, making it look like a walk in the park. As they continue their back and forth, our boy quickly sidesteps, but another punch comes straight at him. He blocks the hit, though the heavy force makes him skid backward. The mafia boss sneers, impressed that he managed to block that one as well. Meanwhile, Jin checks his wrist where he took the punch, and his hand winces from the aching pain. He realizes that the mafia boss predicted his movements and delivered the punch with precision. On the other hand, the mafia boss's curiosity has finally peaked, and he asks Jin who he really is. Jin casually replies that he's just a high school student. The boss isn't buying it in his mind. He figures this kid must have some serious skill and experience to fight like this. Jin takes his stance with a grin. The boss says he's up for sparring further, and balls up his fist to deliver a blow to our boy. Our boy quickly deflects an incoming punch and tries to throw one of his own, but the mafia boss sidesteps it effortlessly. The boss then attempts to attack, but our boy grabs his hand and swings a punch towards his gut. The mafia boss reacts again, causing our boy to end up landing a hit right to his face instead. Mr. Cha is absolutely annoyed after taking that hit right over his face and tries to swing another punch at our boy. Once again, our boy deflects the attack and, locking eyes with his opponent, delivers a brutal blow to his face. He follows this up with a series of powerful punches, knocking Mr. Cha to the ground, leaving him feeling utterly humiliated by a teenager. It's surprising to see a mafia boss who relies more on his fists than on guns anyway. Once Mr. Cha is defeated, he grins, noticing that our boy doesn't seem rattled at all by the fight. He doesn't know where this kid came from, but he's sure that the Kim family definitely messed with the wrong person. The scene transitions to this agency, known as National Assembly Member In by Kim. Inside the building, 2 guards are stationed outside an office. Inside the office, we see Mrs. Kim and Mr. Kim, the women, asks her husband why Mr. Cha hasn't responded yet. She is growing impatient with every passing second, tells him to call Mr. Cha. Mr. Kim responds that she should just wait, as Mr. Cha will call back once he is done dealing with our boy. On the other hand, we also see their daughter, who lets out a sigh, and just then, the telephone begins to beep. The impatient lady quickly tells her husband to put the call on speaker so she can hear the news herself. Mr. Kim begins by apologizing to Mr. Cha, saying he's sorry for the ridiculous favor his wife asked him to fulfill. But the women, however, continue to argue loudly, insisting that their kids were attacked. So, she doesn't understand how it can be called ridiculous. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Cha says that he's the one who should apologize. Mr. Kim asks for an explanation, and Mr. Cha reveals that it seems their children have meddled with the wrong person, because Cha himself also had been defeated by our boy. This news rattles Mr. Kim to the core. As far as he knows, Mr. Cha is the best enforcer in the business, and it's unfathomable that he lost to a high school kid. Just then the office door starts rattling, as someone tries to force it open. Both Mr. and Mrs. Kim look anxiously at the door. When it finally creaks open, they see soldiers sprawled on the ground, leaving the husband and wife utterly anxious and alarmed. Even their bratty daughter jumps out of her seat when they see Jin strolling into the room. The door behind him slams shut, leaving their unconscious bodyguards on the other side. Mr. Cha, still on the phone, quickly realizes that Jin has made it into their place. He leans back, letting out a defeated sigh. He's still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he got beaten by a single high school kid. He's now anxious about how to deal with this mess. Inside the room, Hoojin jumps up from her seat as Mrs. Kim starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know if he's the kid who beat up her children. On the other side, the man at the desk demands to know how Jin managed to get into his office. That is when the stupid woman begins to grit her teeth in frustration because she is pissed that her husband is not overreacting like her. The husband remains calm and composed and asks again, more insistently, how Jin got past the security. Jin just shrugs and casually replies that he simply passed the guards blocking the entrance. Mr. Kim is even more shocked and confused, not understanding how Jin managed to beat Mr. Cha and all the security guards. What bothers him even more is how Jin even found out that he's living here. That shithead woman starts yelling again, telling Jin to stop giving them attitude. She quickly begins dialing the emergency hotline to report Jin for assaulting her kids and breaking into the office. Meanwhile, Wei Jin feels a sense of pride in her mother's actions. She believes that involving the police is a good move, thinking that, even if Jin has impressive fighting skills, the law will take care of him. The arrogant mother tries to intimidate Jin with her threats, claiming she'll call the police, or even the district attorney, because she thinks Jin has no idea who he's dealing with. Jin, however, remains calm and responds that he has a pretty good idea. He points out that her husband is a second-term assembly member currently running for office. The woman scoffs, asking Jin if he knows so much about their status, then why did he assault her kids? On the other hand, Hoojin smugly sneers, feeling satisfied that they've cornered Jin, and faintly tells him that it's game over. The authorities pick up the call, and the lady starts yelling into the phone, demanding that the officers reach Kim's office right away. But before she can say anything more, she falls silent when she hears something unexpected. Apparently, Jin plays the full footage of the karaoke room where Wei Jin and her lackeys assaulted her sister. The undeniable evidence leaves Hoojin speechless, her eyes widening in shock, as if they might pop out of their sockets. Mr. Kim stays silent, feeling utterly devastated. The screams of Daeun begging for forgiveness echo through the room as the trashy ladies continue to beat her to a pulp. Seeing the concrete evidence, Mrs. Kim's jaw drops and she quickly hangs up the hotline, saying she'll call them back later. On the other hand, Hoojin starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know how he got those files. Jin remains silent for a moment, and then the scene flashes back to the outside of the Kim's residence. Inside one of the rooms, Jin is seen sneaking around the house. He opens a laptop and copies all of the data onto a pen drive. In the present, Mr. Kim grits his teeth in frustration, feeling that his kids are a total disappointment. But Hoojin quickly tries to reassure her father, explaining that she had a good reason for everything. Mr. Kim, however, angrily tells her to shut up. Jin then reveals that he also has files involving Gisu Kim. He explains to the Kims that their children always save videos of their conquests. He states that he has dozens of clips showing their violent behavior, beating up kids at school, extorting money and valuables from their victims, and even the latest clip of his sister being assaulted by a group of girls. A karaoke Hoojin is shaking like a leaf, with all these truth bombs exploding around her. But her mother quickly jumps in to defend her daughter, claiming that our boy is just trying to threaten them, and that he won't get away with it. But Jin reminds her that he didn't start this mess, and what he's doing now is hardly a threat, compared to hiring a bunch of gangsters to attack him, and makes it clear that he has recorded all of it too. The father face palms in utter disappointment, and asks our boy if he did all this just because his kids assaulted his sister first. Jin responds that as a parent, they have the right to take their children's side, at all costs. So as a brother, he will do whatever it takes to protect his sister. As well, the man understands where he's coming from, and points out that they'll cover her treatment and offer a hefty settlement to make amends. But our boy makes it clear that this isn't necessary. The father is puzzled and asks what he means by that. He then inquires if Jin would like his kids to apologize to his sister. Hearing her father way, Jin grits her teeth and thinks to herself that she'd rather bite her tongue and bleed to death than apologize. On the other hand, our boy makes it clear that an apology won't undo the time his sister spent in fear and pain. So, he insists that if they really want to compensate him, he wants his sister to never have to see Jisoo or Hoojin Kim again. This demand rattles Hoogin's nerves, but her father quickly agrees, stating that he'll have his kids transfer schools, or perhaps even send them abroad to study. Naturally, the mother and daughter let out a piercing scream in protest, but the father quickly shuts them down and turns his attention back to our boy, asking if this would be enough to satisfy him. Our boy states that he wants them gone from the school starting tomorrow. In response, the father says he'll inform the school, and once that's settled, Hoojin begins to cry, and her tears flow out involuntarily. Just as our boy starts to leave, the father quickly stops him and reminds him that, since he agreed to the demands, he'd like our boy to delete all of the videos he found. Our boy shoots the old man a death glare, and the father can tell from the intensity of his eyes that this kind of deadly glare doesn't belong to a high schooler. Jin makes it clear that he's not a fool, and then begins to walk away, slamming the office door behind him with a resounding thud. Once outside, he finally heads home. His grandpa rushes to open the door and asks if he's okay, while Dion is seen crying in the background. Jin is startled to see them so worried about him, but he smiles and reassures them that no one hurt him. As he begins to enter the house, the old man points out that the people they encountered seemed dangerous. Jin replies that they just stopped by to talk, nothing more. The sister then mentions that something about those people didn't feel right, and that she and Grandpa were very worried. Jin quickly tells her not to worry about anything other than getting better. Jin then hints to his sister that from now on, she'll never have to walk down the stairs again because he's taken care of it. Of course, this doesn't make much sense to her at the moment, but she'll likely figure out what he meant soon enough. The next morning they head to the school. Once inside, they part ways to go to their respective classes. As Dion enters her classroom, she tries to avoid making eye contact with Hoojin. However, her steps falter when she hears students talking about how Hoojin won't be coming to school anymore. The entire class buzzes with curiosity about what happened, and one of the girls explains that Hoojin and her brother are both going to study abroad. This news hits Dion like a thunderbolt out of blue, because her biggest obstacle is finally quitting school. The words Jin had said about taking care of the stairs she had fallen down replay in her mind. She quickly realizes that he must have known about Hoojin's transfer all along. Daeun rushes out of the classroom in order to talk to him about this. When she finds him and calls out to him, he turns around, but as soon as she tries to speak, she's at a loss for words and remains silent. Jin simply smiles and says, "See you later," leaving Dion to tear up. She manages to reciprocate with a soft "see you later" before she breaks down, her emotions overwhelming her. A while later, we find ourselves in an apartment where a blonde girl is asking her friends if it's true that Hoojin is moving overseas. One of the other girls confirms that it's true, saying she was shocked when she first heard, but has no idea why they're leaving suddenly, as Hoojin never mentioned anything about moving abroad. The blonde girl then turns to Chicken Shake, who is sitting silently and seems too preoccupied with herself to respond. One of the girls snaps her out of her reverie and asks if she has nothing to say about it. This rattles the timid girl to her core, and the blonde girl asks her directly if Hoojin is really moving overseas, figuring that since they're in the same class, Chicken Shake might know more about it. Timidly and nervously, the girl confirms that it's true, and that their teacher announced it to the class earlier. The blonde girl then asks if she tried reaching Hoojin directly. Chicken Shake admits she did, but Hoojin didn't pick up the call. Hearing this, all the girls start to believe it might be true. Meanwhile, Chicken Shake nervously checks her phone, biting her nails and anxiety. The last message she got from Hoojin was that her mother was going to take care of our boy, and ever since Chicken Shake has been freaking out, wondering if Hoojin's sudden move has anything to do with him. Just then Hoojin herself arrives in the room, looking absolutely furious. The girls are shocked to see her, and Hoojin just takes a seat on the sofa, grumbling about how she barely managed to sneak out of the house. The girls ask Hoojin if she's really moving overseas. Frustrated, Hoojin grabs her head and says it just happened, but she explains she'll be back after 1 semester. We then flash back into the past, where her dad told her to spend a semester abroad, promising he'd sort everything out by the time she gets back, because he doesn't want those videos going public. Either she keeps this part to herself though, and the other girls just laugh and tease her, saying she's going to enjoy her vacation. The blonde sneers, clearly annoyed by their attitude. Another girl asks why the sudden move and if Gisu is going to. Hoojin simply says it's a family matter, and she doesn't need to go into details. The redhead girl then asks about Dion and her brother, curious about how things went, and if Gisu managed to beat our boy or not. Hoojin tells them not to ask, insisting that Gisu probably has handled the situation already. However, we all know that she just doesn't want to admit that her brother and his lackeys got thoroughly defeated by our boy, as it would be too humiliating. She grows even more agitated, thinking about how pleased Dayan will be to see her leaving the school. This irritation sparks an idea in her mind, and she decides to mess with Dayan one last time, asking her friends to help with her plan. Her friends question whether it's really necessary, and even Chicken Shake jumps in shock and expresses her reluctance, but Hoojin insists they should consider how cocky Dan will be without anyone to bully her. She plans to deal with Dion before she leaves Korea, wanting to make sure she gets her revenge. Chicken Shake grows increasingly anxious and terrified as Hoojin continues to reveal her twisted plan. Hoojin gets cocky, boasting that Dion's grandpa is a security guard somewhere, and she plans to have her mom get him fired. She believes this will teach Dayon a lesson not to mess with anyone from the Kim family. This is seriously messed up. Diane is just an innocent girl, and Weejin's plotting is enough to make anyone sick. But before this trash woman can act on her disturbing thoughts, her face goes pale when she sees a figure standing before her, cloaked in a hoodie with a mask over their face. It doesn't take long for her to recognize that it must be Jin. However, Jin pulls a classic card move and asks her who Jin is, questioning how she can be so sure when he's wearing a mask and she can't see his face. He casually explains that he's just here to check if everyone's having a good time, and is quite pleased to see that everyone from the karaoke room video is present. One of the girls starts trembling and asks what he's talking about. That's when the boy reminds them he's referring to the place where they all filmed his sister getting beaten up. Hoojin's face turns ash, and as she realizes he might have been there, waiting all along just to mess with her. Chicken Shake is visibly sweating and trembling, clearly aware of what might come next. The other two girls just sit there utterly silent. The boy starts to shut the door, asking why no one's singing, since he thought everyone here loved to scream along to loud music. With that, he slams the door shut, leaving us with no clue about what he might do next. The scene takes us to the hospital, where the Kim family is gathered. The father in-by Kim is clearly annoyed. Asking where Hoojin went, her brother explains that she stepped out to say goodbye to her friends. In-by, his irritation grows as he asks why she left when she was supposed to stay put until they had everything sorted out. Just then a guy burst into the room, quickly turning on the TV and telling his master he needs to see what's going on. On the screen, it's clear that our boy has already made the videos of what Hoojin did go viral. The footage is spreading fast, and the situation is quickly becoming a public spectacle. The entire Kim family falls silent as they watch the news. The reporter continues to drop bombshells, revealing that there are dozens of violent video circulating with many more incidents likely unrecorded. Civic groups and politicians are now proposing a special bill to bring the culprits to justice. Gisu starts to lose his composure, and the reporter adds that the nation is especially appalled by the revelation that the culprits are the children of candidate in by Kim. It's clear that the father is in deep trouble. And it's all thanks to his outrageous wife, who pushed everything to this point. Given Hoojin's plan to make our grandpa jobless, it seems they're getting exactly what they deserve. We cut back to our boy being grilled by Mr. Cha, who demands to know why he went ahead with his plan when he had already come to terms with the Kim family. Our boy's mind flashes back to the past, where we find him learning all about the Kim family's deep political connections. He reveals that it was highly unlikely everything would have gone smoothly, so he did what he felt had to be done. In the present, he admits he did not honor the agreement they had. Mr. Cha questions whether he really thinks the Kim family would just let him walk away. Our boy confidently asserts that he's probably the last thing on their minds. Right now it seems our boy might be right. The reporter continues to drop more bombshells, revealing recent evidence of by Kim's involvement in money laundering, bribery, and election fraud. The evidence is so damning that even his fellow party members are calling for a strict investigation, with everyone trying to cut ties to avoid any damage to their party. As soon as Mr. Kim hears this, he slumps down on the bed like a lifeless doll. Back with Mr. Cha, he seems to suspect that our boy has dug up some data about his past as well, and Cha does not want to get exposed to the law, just like the Kim family. So he quickly asks who our MC really is. Our boy responds simply saying he's just an average teenager. Mr. Cha smirks at this ridiculous remark, noting that nothing about Jin is average. The scene shifts to the classroom, where the girls are feeling anxious and blushing. As they see Jin, they whisper among themselves, trying to muster the courage to approach him and ask him something, but everyone remains too shy to make a move. As Jin sits lost in thought, his phone rings. It's Dan, letting him know that she can walk home by herself today and telling him to take a break and hang out with his friends. Jin is puzzled by the concept of hanging out and wonders how to go about it. Just then one of his friends, Yuan Chan, pops up and greets him. As Yuan Chan sits down, he asks if he is busy today. Our boy remains silent, which prompts Young Chan to remember that Jin always walks his little sister home, so he must be busy after school. But not surprisingly, Jin tells his friend that he's actually free today. Young Chan's face lights up with happiness, and they plan to hang out after school. However, Young Chan's enthusiasm quickly fades when he hears an unpleasant voice. As the scene zooms out, we see these two beta bullies of the class step forward. They both reveal that they've heard the news and know that Jin is the reason Gisu Kim is moving abroad. Young Chun is totally shocked by the news, and the other students lounging around are equally caught off guard. The bullies spill the beans that, even though Gisu and his sister were all set to move abroad, they're stuck now because their whole family's in hot water. After the info leak, our boy jumps in to set things straight, telling the bullies they've got it all wrong. But Jae-hung chimes in saying there's no need for modesty because everyone knows. Our boy trashed Gisu and his crew at their hideout a couple of days ago. Hyuk Jin backs him up, explaining that Jin took them all out by himself, and now everyone's saying Gisu is too embarrassed to show his face at school. He's itching to hear just how badly our boy must have beaten Gisu to make him leave the country altogether. Young Chan is finally convinced that Jin is actually a skilled fighter, and that his performance that day wasn't just luck. Young Jin leans in and says, now that they won't have to deal with that jerk anymore, he's itching to throw a party, so he invites our boy to celebrate after school today. Jae-young agrees, adding that they've been in the class for days without really spending time together, and he suggests they show our boy around the area, but our guy flatly turns them down, saying he already has plans for today. Naturally, the bullies are puzzled and ask what he's up to. With a pleasant smile, Jin replies that he's planning to hang out with Young Chun. That's when Zhao Yang starts creeping in, with his disgusting grin leaning toward Young Chun. and saying he'll join their hangout. Young Chen also leans closer to the terrified guy and expresses his desire to join in as well after forcefully making Young Chen agree. They start to walk away saying they'll meet up later. Our boy quickly asks his friend if he really wants to let these goons join in, and the poor guy stutters a positive response with a pale face. The teacher finally arrives in the classroom, and she's brought along 2 transfer students. One of them is a plain-looking guy, but the real standout is a stunning beauty with striking black hair. Young Chan's eyes immediately light up at the sight of her, and our boy quickly asks if he knows who they are. Young Chan explains that everyone knows this girl. She's Yeona Sin, and her grandpa owns SW Corporation, the biggest company in Korea. The guy next to her is Sokju Ko, and there are rumors that he's been with her since they were kids and is seen as her associate and bodyguard. The teacher notes that, since everyone's familiar with these two, she won't waste time on introductions. She reveals that both of them have been studying in the US for the past 2 years and will be joining the class starting today. The beta lackeys don't seem too thrilled about these 2 newcomers in the classroom with just Jin before. Their chances to rule the classroom were slim to none. But now with these 2 around, they're not so sure they can even think about bullying anyone. Meanwhile, Young Chan was curious about the 2 extra desks in the class, but it's clear now who they're for. He can't help but think Yeona looks even more stunning than he remembered. Even the students in the class can't keep their eyes off her. As Sokju behind the lady walks forward, he could not help but notice our boy, and their eyes lock for a moment. Yeona too can't resist, but glances at him while she is walking past him. Once both of the newcomers take their seats, Sokju tells Yeona that our boy wasn't in the evaluation report he received a week ago, and he wants to double-check. Yeona is intrigued and glances at our boy once more, and we can tell she is clearly curious about him. Our boy notices Yeona glancing at him, and when he looks back he finds her smiling. However, he just turns his gaze away again, which seems to irritate her since she didn't get a reciprocating smile. Meanwhile, Young Chun continues their conversation and asks if he has any particular place he wants to go. Jin says he's okay with anywhere, so Young Chun suggests hitting the game room. Well, it seems like the word gaming room triggers some memories for our boy, while his friends explain that it's nearby and just upgraded their PCs. That's when we flash back to the past, where we hear the authoritative tone of a senior telling a group of soldiers that they will begin today's portion of their practical life training program. He explains that there's one thing every Korean teenager must know, and that's the gaming room. This is the first time our boy has heard about the gaming room. The senior further explains that gaming rooms offer personal computers for a fee and both students and adults can use them. Curious, our boy asks what people do there. The senior explains that while some users browse the internet or watch X-rated videos, most people are there to play games. For the average high school student, over 90% are playing some kind of computer game. The senior then introduces some of the most common games. First up is Legends of League, followed by Battle Royale. Back in the present, our boy reflects on how he can finally make use of the major's intel. Meanwhile, Young Chun adds that they'll also grab some ramen at the game room and maybe check out Koinka afterward. Well, it seems like Koinka is yet another term our boy picked up during his military days. While learning about practical life, the senior explains to him that high schoolers frequently visit coin karaoke, also known as Koinka. These establishments basically allow for sing-alongs with just a few coins. Major Kong tells our boy that he should prepare a few songs to sing in case he ends up going to one, and promises to send him a list of popular songs for kids his age to learn. As our guy starts brainstorming ideas and trying to remember some songs, his friend sits nervously nearby, wondering why Jin suddenly looks so serious. Once the bell rings, the students head out for the day. And that's when we see this hottie once again, and as usual, she is with her lackey. Apparently, they're discussing our boy and discover that he transferred just a few days ago, is 18 years old, and happens to be Dion Ayu's older brother. Yeona is surprised to learn that Dion has a brother because she thought her only family was her grandpa. Sokjuka agrees and explains that Dion has been living with her paternal grandfather since her parents and brother died in a plane crash. Yeona then asks how she still has a brother. Ko replies that it's hard to believe, But apparently, her deceased brother has suddenly come back to life just before they transferred to school. He suggests they should dig a little deeper into our boy's past. Meanwhile, it's gotten pretty late already, and we find our boy strolling alone. His phone keeps ringing, with notifications from his friends, showing they had a blast at the gaming center. We flash back to the gaming club where we see Hyuk Jin, our boy Jaehyung and Young Chan all hanging out. Everyone is amazed by how Young Chan carried them through the game. Jaehyung even asks about his rank, guessing it must be Diamond or Master. Their jaws drop when Young Chan timidly reveals that he's actually at Challenger rank. From that moment, their attitude toward Young Chan shifts completely. In the present moment, even our boy finds the sudden change odd. As they keep chatting excitedly about Young Chan's impressive rank, as he's looking at his phone, his sister arrives. He quickly asks her what she's doing here. She explains that they ran out of garbage bags at home, so she went to get some, and she also picked up a few snacks. Our boy offers to carry the bags, but his sweet sister insists it's not necessary. She then asks if he was hanging out with his friends, and he confirms that he was. She feels a warm sense of relief, glad to see that he's made friends, and that people aren't avoiding him because of the fight. When she asks where he went, he bluntly replies that he went to the game room. Well, it seems like this isn't exactly what she expected to hear, as she thought he might have developed different interests after living overseas for so long. Curious about her own experiences at school, he asks how things have been for her. She pauses for a moment before responding that school hasn't been this fun in years. She then asks if he also had something to eat. He nods, saying they had a blast at the game room, where every kind of snack was available. He then asks her about her plans, and she mentions that she's waiting for Grandpa to come home so they can eat together. Our boy then asks if he can join them, which confuses her since she thought he'd already eaten. He awkwardly admits that he's still a bit hungry. We already know that our boy just wants to have some quality family time. When they get home, there's a spread of delicious food laid out on the table, and they all seem to be having a great time eating together. It does seem odd that Grandpa only works a security job, yet they have such a variety of food every day. It's a bit of a mystery how they manage that, as they're having a good time eating together. Our boy's thoughts drift back to his mercenary days. After a moment, he shakes off the nostalgia and is back to smiling. Just then his phone rings. It's Major Kong calling. The Major reminds him that he should just call him bro instead of using his rank. The Major asks how things are going, and our boy says he's doing well. But when the Major probes about his school life, there's an awkward silence on the line. In response, getting a bit anxious, the Major quickly asks if our boy has killed someone. Jin quickly says no, but admits he did run into some trouble. That was quickly sorted out. The senior lets out a sigh of relief, and our boy reassures him that everything is fine now, and there's nothing to worry about. Kong is relieved, and reminds our boy that they're always there for him. In response, Jin promises he won't forget that. The next day at school, we see the trio in class, but our boy is noticeably missing, and Young Chan seems a bit awkward. Among the two bullies, Jae-hung starts asking odd questions. Curiously, he asks who they think would win in a fight between Jin and So. Joko Jokjin points out that while Jin is good, he probably couldn't beat Sukju Ko, who's been training in combat since he was a kid. To him, our boy seems like an amateur in comparison. Jung agrees, adding that Sukju Ko is one tough mother fudger. Young Chan then asks if it's true that Sokyoko fought against 20 dudes in one. Blonde quickly corrects him, saying it was actually 30 guys. The number leaves Young Chan momentarily stunned. He even forget to breathe. For a second, Brown Head explains that when a group of street thugs was harassing Yona Sin, Sojuka took them all out. He says it started with 10 guys, but they kept coming by the time 30 guys showed up. Sokju was still going strong. He walked off without a scratch, while the 30 thugs were left unconscious on the street, like discarded toys. The timid boy then asks about the rumors he heard about Sokju catching the kidnappers. Who took Yona? He's heard that the people behind it were all retired soldiers. The blonde quickly confirms that the story about Sokju Ko catching the kidnappers is probably true. As well, he insists that Jin doesn't stand a chance against Sokju, because he is on a whole other level. It's sometimes hilarious to think that teenagers, in these Korean manhwa, are taking down entire gangs, single-handedly making the government, and all those intelligence and law enforcement departments, look like they're just wasting taxpayer money. In the meantime, our boy suddenly stops in the corridor when he comes face to face with Sokju. Without wasting any time, Sokju asks him straightforwardly what he's doing here. Confused, our boy makes it clear that he doesn't understand what he is getting at. Sokju simplifies his approach and asks why he is lying about his identity. He mentions that he's heard our boy had a hand in Gisu and Hoojin Kim moving away. Jin clarifies that he did have some beef with Gisu, but he had nothing to do with their departure. That is when Sohu points out that he checked with the school our boys supposedly attended overseas, and they've never heard of him. Things seem to be heating up, but before we get our boy's response to Sokju, the scene shifts to Daeun. She's approached by Iona, the stunning girl from earlier. After a while, the two ladies are catching up, and Daeun mentions she didn't know Yona was back in Korea. Yona explains that she just started school the day before and is actually in her brother's homeroom class. Daeun perks up in surprise. Yona then points out that she doesn't remember Daeun mentioning having a brother before. Daeun explains that everyone thought her brother had died in the crash with her parents 10 years ago, but he survived. They only found out about his survival about 6 months ago. The scene flashes back to the past again. Daeun has just returned home and finds her grandfather frozen in place while holding the telephone receiver. Tears are streaming down his face as he reveals the shocking news that Jin is alive. This revelation leaves Daeun stunned, and it's how she learns about her brother's survival. Back in the present, Yona asks why no one didn't know about her brother all these years if he was alive but didn't reach out. Daeun explains that Jin lost his memory in the crash, and it was only recently that he started to regain some of it, and someone helped them locate and reconnect with him. Yona, clearly skeptical, finds it hard to believe. Daeun confirms that Jin only has faint memories of having a grandfather and a younger sister. After the interrogation, Yona flashes a pleasant smile and comments that their grandfather must have been overjoyed to get his grandson back. Yona comments that their grandfather is indeed overjoyed, explaining that after receiving the call, he cried for hours and then took time off work to enroll in cooking classes. He wanted to improve his Korean cooking skills, thinking that Jin might not have had much of that growing up. Yona comments that their grandpa must really love his grandkids, and Daeun smiles, agreeing that he definitely does. But then Yona throws a serious question her way, asking is she absolutely sure Jin is her brother. Dan looks a bit surprised, but quickly gives a positive response, saying Jin is definitely her brother, and they even took a DNA test to be sure. Our girl then asks why Yona is so interested in her brother. This question clearly catches Yona off guard. Since she is not sure what to say, she quickly asks almost frantically if her brother has a girlfriend. We then cut back to our boy, who asks Sokju what the hell he's talking about. Sokju repeats his question, asking what's so important about this school that our boy had to forge his records just to be here. Jin responds by asking if he's being accused of having fake records. Sokju confirms this, saying they must be fake because, according to his research, Jin never lived in that city, and the school he claims to have attended doesn't even have a record of him. Our boy then asks about the proof and reminds Sokju that if he's claiming the records are fake, there must be some evidence to back up the claim. Sokju is momentarily at a loss for how to counter this question. He discovered the discrepancy by digging around and talking to people connected to the school overseas, but he has no tangible proof. He's amazed at how Jin handles the situation without flinching or showing any sign of being startled. Then our boy finally asks why Sokju is running a background check on him. In response, the blackhead explains that he can't just sit around and watch a suspicious kid who might pose a threat to his mistress. A silence falls between them for a moment, but then our boy finally answers, saying he came back home. Sokju was baffled by this vague response, so our boy clarifies that he was asked what he came here for, and his answer is simply that he returned from overseas for his family. With that, our boy starts to leave. Seochu stares after him with skeptical eyes, thinking that since he already suspects our boy has forged his records, It won't be long before he figures out his true identity. Once the class begins, we see Jung quietly immersed in playing video games, while the blondie scrolls through his phone idly. Our boy Jin notices that both Seokju and Yona are absent from class. He's intrigued by how quickly these two, having just transferred yesterday, managed to gather so much information about him in less than a day. When the bell rings, the beta bullies approach young Chan, inviting him to play games and push ranks. They also invite Jin, but he declines, mentioning it's his grandpa's birthday today. The bullies decide to hang out themselves, and Young Chan is on board with that plan. Meanwhile, we're back with the Black Beauty, where Seokju is filling her in on the situation. He's convinced that Jin has definitely forged all his records, and even questions the authenticity of the DNA test. Seokju further mentions that his research dug up some pretty rough stuff about his sister Dion. Apparently, she's been getting seriously bullied by Gisu, Kim, and his sister for the past 2 years. When Yona asks just how bad it was, Seokju says it's enough to make anyone wonder how she endured the bullying all these years. He explains that the videos of her assault weren't exactly publicized, but he is pretty sure that the assault she faced was just as serious. Yin is pretty blown away and can't help but think about how messed up kids these days can be. Seokju adds that Jin's already knocked out Gisu, Kim, and his crew twice, and saved her sister from the bullying. Yona chuckles to herself, thinking it's kind of sweet that her long-lost brother comes back from the dead and takes out her bullies, while Yona's own siblings only ever seem to want to get rid of her. Yona's curiosity gets the best of her as she starts piecing things together. She points out that if Jin had really come to school with the intent to target her, it doesn't make sense that he'd be so upfront about it. A smart person would have stayed under the radar. Seokju agrees, noting that someone with a real plan would have kept a low profile. Yona's mind starts racing once again, and she asks if Jin might have some kind of ulterior motive related to Dion's family. She brings up the insurance money from the plane crash. Seokju then reveals that the grandpa received it, but hasn't used it, making it grow over the years. Furthermore, Grandpa returned the share of money which he got for Jin's death since he was alive. But there's still a substantial amount left, so there is still a possibility that he might be after the money. Yona connects the dots and highlights that if Jin might actually be after the money, then it could mean Dion is in danger from her own brother. The scene shifts back to the grocery store, where our duo can be seen shopping. And as usual, Jin is drawing a lot of attention from the girls around while they browse for items. Dan takes a deep breath and admits she hesitates to ask, but her curiosity is overwhelming, so she desperately wants to know what his life was like. After the crash, our boy remains quiet for a moment, and the girl starts apologizing frantically, saying he doesn't have to answer if it's uncomfortable, but he just smiles and reassures her that it's okay. He begins his story, explaining that he was deeply traumatized and could barely think straight. He did whatever he could to survive in a place where he didn't even speak the language, staying constantly busy just to get by. The girl falls silent, absorbing this heavy revelation. Then she starts to chuckle and asks if he was too busy to have a girlfriend. During that time he nods, agreeing with a laugh. She then reveals that she was surprised to learn he's in the same homeroom as Yona, something Yona herself had mentioned to her. Jean is surprised to hear this and quickly asks her if she knows her. Dion explains that Yona was really nice to her before she moved to the US, and she had missed her a lot. So when she saw her again today, it was a happy reunion. Then, with a playful grin, Dion reveals that Yona even asked her if he has a girlfriend, and of course, our boy just gives us somewhat typical reaction upon hearing this later. Back at home, the birthday celebrations are in full swing. The siblings present their grandpa with a gift. As he unwraps it, he discovers a high-quality wallet inside, and his face lights up with joy. He's genuinely touched and feels a bit guilty for the low pocket money they have, thinking they must have spent more than they could afford. But his granddaughter just smiles warmly and reassures him that they had more than enough to get him a gift, and besides, it wasn't too expensive. The old man's hands tremble with happiness as he holds the wallet, with his voice thick with emotion. He tells them that the biggest gift he could ever ask for was already given to him when Jin came back home safe and sound. Nothing could ever top that. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing grabs everyone's attention. Dion rushes to her room to answer it. While she's chatting on the phone, Jin tries to eavesdrop quietly. That's when he hears the girl mention she's heading out to the convenience store for a bit. The old man questions why she's going out at this late hour, and it turns out she is heading out because Yona stopped by for a quick chat. Well, we can tell that Jin definitely senses something is off. Later that night, Jin is digging into his computer, trying to uncover all he can about SW Corporation, which he family owns. He's curious why Yona seems so interested in him, and why they're running a background check on a random transfer student like him. Jin reflects on his conversation with Sokju, when suddenly he hears a call from his grandfather. When he steps into the living room, his grandpa mentions he's heading out for a bit too. Our boy asks if he's going after Dion, and the old man kind of agrees. He adds that he just needs some fresh air. Jin smiles and tells his grandpa to stay put, and he'll go check on her instead. But the old man insists on going out by himself. Jin then reminds him about the early job he has in the morning, and finally our boy decides to head out on his own. Later, we see both girls chatting away about their studies and other topics. Fiona shares her experiences studying abroad, and suggests that Dion consider studying outside as well in response. Dion admits she never really thought about it before. When Fiona asks why, Dion explains that it costs a lot, and she'd need to be away for several years, which means she wouldn't get to be with her grandpa for a while. Fiona finds this a bit strange, so Dion further elaborates, explaining that she doesn't want her grandpa to be alone, especially since he's not in the best of health these days. However, she's grateful that her brother is always around, as his presence really helps her feel better. Meanwhile, Yona's having a hard time bringing up the real reason she came over. Since Dion seems to really trust her brother, she's not sure how to bring it up without causing problems. We then flash back a bit, where Sokju tells Yona that someone from the supposed overseas school confirmed that Dion's brother never attended there. They even looked at his photo and verified he was never a student. Plus, the current resident at his false address gave solid proof that he never lived there. Kochu's also checking out some other leads, so Yona decides she needs to meet with Dion to discuss what they found. But Soku reminds her that, while they have proof the records were forged, they can't yet prove that he isn't Dion's real brother. Yona's concerned because the records from the decade he was missing are basically fake since she's now living with him. It's a big deal that can't be ignored. She thinks Diane deserves to know the truth about the records, and wants to at least fill her in on what they found so far. In the present, Yona is struggling to bring up the main topic she came here to discuss, even though it's her primary reason for visiting, just as Dion expresses how happy she is to be chatting like this after a long time. We also see our boy making his way toward the both of the girls. However, Kochu steps in front of him, but Jin simply tries to walk past him. But the newcomer quickly tells him to stay put. In Kochu's mind, he's sure Jin must be here, because he's worried they're going to share everything with Dion. So he quickly blocks our boy's path and tells him that the both girls are just catching up, and asks him to give them some time alone. Suddenly, a high-speed Volkswagen comes barreling toward them. Before anyone can react, the car slams into both of the boys, knocking them down like bowling pins. They hit the ground as the Volkswagen screeches to a halt right where the two girls are sitting. Jin tries to stand up, but it's clear he's severely injured, especially around his head, as he struggles to focus his groggy eyes. Catch sight of some shady people from the van, trying to abduct both of the girls. Without wasting a second, Jin starts sprinting like a madman. But his efforts are in vain. The kidnappers have already taken the girls, and there's no way he can outrun a car, so they're left behind helpless. The both of them quickly look at each other, and in their anger, grab each other by the collars. But after exchanging a few heated words, they realize neither of them is behind the abduction, so they let go. The black-haired guy immediately pulls out his phone and calls the security team at SW Corporation, urgently reporting that Yona has been kidnapped. He tells them to track her down using the security footage. Meanwhile, Jin starts walking off, and the black-haired guy quickly asks him where he's going and if he's actually not behind all this. Jin simply replies that he doesn't have time to argue with anyone. Sohu points out that SW Corporation security is already on it and will find the girl soon. Until then, Jin will need to stick with him, so they can confirm his identity. But our boy makes it clear that he's going to find his sister, and if Seokju wants to follow him, he can gladly do so. Seokju starts to get the sense that Jin might not be involved after all, but then our boy suddenly stops and humorously asks Seokju if he brought his car with him. The scene shifts to the bustling heart of the city's entertainment district inside one of the pubs. Mr. Cha is sitting back, puffing on a cigarette and enjoying his laid-back time. Just then, his lackey informs him that someone is here to see him. When Mr. Cha turns around, he sees Jin standing there. Scene then shifts to Saw Corporation, where we see a regal-looking lady sitting in her chair. I can tell she's definitely Fiona's sister, because she looks just as gorgeous, with her flowing black hair. Suddenly an assistant bursts into the room. The woman looks a bit annoyed at this sudden intrusion, and wants to know why he didn't bother to ask for permission. Before barging in, the assistant quickly reports that Yona has been kidnapped. The news surprises the lady, but surprisingly, she doesn't seem too troubled by it. In fact, she starts to smile faintly, and seems to think that the rumors must be true. After all, not entirely sure what she's referring to. But let's roll with it, she then asks if their grandfather is still planning to go after the company. The assistant states that he is not sure. So she leans back, hoping that if he continues to pursue them without backing down, Yuna will eventually die. It's definitely something she's looking forward to. The scene transitions back to the pub, where we pick up the story with our main character meeting with Cha, and Soju is also tagging along with him. Seokju already seems to know about Cha, as he recognizes him from their database, and is curious about how our boy knows this gangster. Cha starts by asking what our boy wants. In response, Jin simply says he needs some intel. Cha lights up another cigarette and scoffs, asking why he would bother to help him. Our boy cuts to the chase, revealing that the granddaughter of S.A. Corporation has been kidnapped. Well, that is something Cha definitely was not expecting to hear. However, he quickly brushes it off, saying it's not their problem, and that they don't deal with such issues, because it would be incredibly risky to mess with Saw Corporation. Our boy asks if Cha has any leads to offer, but the mafia boss makes it clear that there's no reason for him to share anything, especially since he's already in a difficult situation. Thanks to our boy, that's when our boy reveals that his younger sister was also taken, along with Saw's granddaughter. Cha finally realizes he's in a tough spot now, as messing with our boy sister is like messing with John Wick's dog. Both are equally dangerous. So he then starts explaining, and mentions that some people speaking broken Korean were asking around for untraceable warehouses, as well as for burners' cars and a few extra hands. The offer was tempting, but he turned them down, because dealing with this kind of trouble isn't something you can easily wash off. He adds that he's heard another crew took the job, and all he knows is they're working out of Incheon. That's all the info he's got. It wouldn't be surprising if Seokju had already figured out who's behind this mess. Meanwhile, our boy starts to walk away after giving a final thanks, but then the mafia boss tosses his phone to our boy, and tells him to save his number. Jin cluelessly looks at him, puzzled about why he'd need his number. The mafia boss gets a bit agitated and clarifies that he'll need it to contact him once he digs into the warehouse for more info. With that, our boy starts entering his digits. He also asks if the bike outside the door belongs to him. John knows exactly what our boy is planning to do with it, so he feels hesitant to respond. But eventually my guy takes the heavy bike, and before leaving, he tells the oak to figure his own way out to get there because he's taking the bike. Seokju questions whether he is going to trust this shady, half-baked info and going to chase those kidnappers. Based on that, our boy explains that he doesn't have time to waste, because Yona will probably be safe until the kidnappers get what they want, but there's no telling what they might do with Dion. Seokju gets the logic behind Jin's reasoning, and stays quiet, and he can tell that he is a quick and sharp thinker. Seokju then tells him that he's already passed the info to his security team and will follow him in his car. Jin just gives a cold response, saying Seokju can do whatever he wants. With that, he puts on his helmet, revs up the gas pedal, and speeds off through the streets. The scene then switches back to the girls, where we see Dion waking up with a headache, and as she becomes aware of her surroundings, Yona quickly apologizes, saying it's probably her fault that Daein got dragged into this. Daein's mind starts to recall the recent event, and she is shocked to remember that they have been kidnapped, and Yona sadly confirms it, adding that she didn't expect this to happen so soon. After returning to Korea just then, the kidnappers arrive, and Yona coldly asks them why they had been abducted. One of the kidnappers snaps at her to shut up and stay quiet, and it'll be over soon enough. Of course, it does not take her long to realize that these filthy people must be planning to use her as leverage against her grandfather. One of the lackeys then asks the boss what they should do with Dion, who was kidnapped simply because she was with Yona. Unsurprisingly, the boss decides she is useless to them and orders his lackeys to get rid of her. But Yona immediately speaks up, insisting she won't let them harm Daeon. The boss asks what she can possibly do, and Yona threatens that she'll bite her tongue and bleed to death, making it impossible for them to use her as a bargaining chip. The mafia boss finds it hilarious that she's willing to risk her life for someone she barely knows. He further taunts her, urging her to go ahead and try biting her tongue. Well, the mafia boss should have been more careful with his words, because Yona doesn't hesitate and bites her tongue, leaving blood pouring from her mouth. The boss yells in surprise, while the other lackey watches in silence, clearly startled to see her steal like guts. The boss quickly stands up and tells her that her guts have bought her some time. The lackeys ask what the next order is. The boss tells them to get rid of Daeon later, and instructs them to stuff her mouth shut so she can't make any noise. The scene then flashes back to our boy and Sokju. It looks like they've arrived at the location Mr. Cha mentioned. Sokju points out that the location seems legit because SW security tracked the minivan footage to this area. As our boy starts to move forward, Sokju tells him to stop and wait for backup, since he sent their coordinates to SW security and they should arrive soon. But our boy reminds him that Daeon doesn't have much time left, so he got to make it quick. There's no room for argument, so they proceed forward and spot a bunch of goons patrolling the area. Suddenly our boy leaps over one of the goons, grabs him by the throat and starts choking him out. The lackey eventually loses consciousness, and our boy quietly drags him into the shadows, adding him to a pile of other goons. He's already taken down. Sokju is also helping out, and he's blown away by Jin's ability to take down opponents silently. He's so impressed that he asks Jin who the heck he is. Jin just casually replies that he's an average student at the same school. The scene shifts to SW Corporation, where we finally meet the big boss, the grandpa of the company. He's getting a report from the black-suited guy about the kidnappers' demands. The guy explains that the kidnappers want SW Corp to cancel their recent contract. If SW Corp doesn't respond within an hour or refuses to comply, they'll kill Miss Fiona. The old man asks about the security details, and the black-suited guy says that SW security will reach the location where Fiona is being held within 50 minutes back at the shady location. We hear two lackeys chatting. They're curious about their client and why they're making them do this kidnapping. One of them says their boss has already made it clear that it's none of their business and they should just follow orders. Just then, one of the lackeys gets a smack right on the head and crumples to the ground. He turns around wincing to see Jin, who's already taken out the other guy. After they're done with the goons, Jin asks his fellow how many he's knocked out. Sohu says the guy he left behind makes it 5 in total. Jin then does a quick mental tally and realizes they've taken down 14 guys, meaning the enemy have got plenty of muscle and resources. Soku is blown away that Jin managed to take down 9 guys while he struggled with just 5. Finally, Jin asks the blackhead who's pulling the strings. The guy lets out a heavy sigh and says they don't really know. Apparently these kinds of incidents pop up now and then. This kind of thing also happened when they were in America. He never thought it would happen again so soon after coming back to Korea, and feels like he should have been more on the ball. Jin points out that the real mastermind must be with Yona right now, so he decides to push deeper into the location. Before he moves on, Jin asks Sokju if he'll be okay. Sokju looks puzzled and asks, "Okay, about what?" Jin explains that he was pretty banged up when that van ran over him. The blackhead just shrugs it off, saying our boy should focus on his own injured leg instead. Suddenly someone starts shouting, asking where all the lookouts went. Another one jokes that maybe everyone went to take a dump, but then another questions why they'd all need to take a dump together. As they walk forward, they finally spot their guys lying unconscious. Before the confused goons can figure out what's happening, Jin delivers a brutal knee smash to one's face. Jin then turns to the thin-mustached goon, grabs his hand and delivers a savage kick to his leg, followed by a brutal smack to his head. With that, both goons are out cold. Jin decides to split up, but before they part ways, Sokju calls out to him when our boy turns around. Sokju says that once they're out of this mess, he owes Jin an official apology. Back with the boss, he's hearing the commotion outside and tells his lackeys to check it out. We see our ladies with their faces covered in clothes to keep them from screaming. As Jin walks down, he runs into the lackeys. The guy in the mask points out that he has seen Sokju in pictures, so he can confirm that this brat definitely is not him. He then questions our boy how he came inside. Jin stays silent in response, and he quickly figures out these are the guys behind the kidnapping. Meanwhile, the masked guy orders his lackeys to just get rid of this brat. Just before we see Jin take out the goons, the scene cuts to Sokju, who's hiding in the storeroom, looking around cautiously. There he finds both ladies tied up, and thankfully no one else is around. So he figures they must all be out looking for Jin. He sneaks over to the girls, quickly pulls the mask off Yona's face, and she asks if the security team has arrived. Sokju tells her they're on their way. Yona is shocked to hear this, and asks how he found them out here. That's when the mafia boss chimes in, and he is thoroughly pleased to hear that the security team won't be arriving anytime soon. The boss then says he must be Sokju from SW Corporation, and he's heard a lot about him. He adds that this brat has been quite the pain, always lurking around Yona and ruining their plans. The mafia boss makes it clear he has no clue how Sokju found their hideout, but he's certain it wasn't smart to come here alone without backup. One of the lackeys suddenly lunges at Sokju, but my guy sidesteps the attack and throws a punch of his own. However, this lackey isn't a pushover. He dodges the punch and quickly retaliates. Sokju realizes this guy is tougher than the goons they took down outside, and he's having a hard time keeping up. But then Sokju lands a brutal whack and follows up with a devastating punch to the lackey's gut, leaving him doubled over in pain. To finish things off, Sokju delivers a powerful leg swing, and the lackey finally looks like he's down for the count. Just when we think it's over, the thug tries to swing back in retaliation, but Sokju meets him with a devastating knee smash to the back, and the guy quickly starts to crumble. The scar-faced boss notes that he knew Sokju had been trained from a young age, but he didn't realize he was this impressive. Even the two girls are shocked by what they're witnessing, but the mafia boss isn't here for a duel of pride. With those words, the lackey pulls out a blade and starts slashing at Sokju, landing several brutal cuts across his body. The boss grins under his mask, saying he didn't expect this brat to fight empty-handed, which makes dealing with him a lot easier. The lackey charges at Sokju again with the dagger and begins swinging left and right like a madman. Sokju does his best to dodge, but he's still taking deep, painful cuts that leave him struggling to move. The boss pulls out his own dagger and starts juggling it in the air, clearly enjoying himself as he eyes the girls. As soon as Sokju sees this, he immediately knows Daeon is in serious trouble. The poor girl is already terrified, just imagining what's about to happen. Before Sokju can react, the bastard throws his dagger straight at her, aiming to end her life, but at the last second, Yona leaps in front of Daeon, and just as the dagger is about to hit, Sokju jumps in front of both girls, taking the blade straight into his back. The mafia boss scoffs at Sokju, mocking him as a pitiful bastard who's only good for the empty praises people give him. He then orders his lackeys to leave Yona alone and kill the other two. The lackeys quickly agree and begin to walk forward to carry out the order. Suddenly, everyone hears the door creak open, and all eyes turn to see Jin making a badass entrance after taking down the goons and leaving them sprawled on the ground. Back at the club, gangster Cha is there with his lackeys. They fill him in with the latest info, reporting that the Goshong cartel is behind the abduction. Cha is stunned by the ridiculous mistake the Goshong cartel made by getting involved with both Jin and SW Corporation. It was bound to backfire, considering how the cartel never digs into their clients before taking a job. One of the lackeys then asks Cha why he helped Jin. He further points out that Jin is the one who put them in a tight spot, and he's the one who exposed all the dirt on the Kim family they've been keeping under wraps for years. Cha lets out a big sigh, saying he had no choice. He points out that he's just an old man who couldn't possibly take on a kid like Jin, and they can't just take revenge on him, especially since it was the Kim family who messed with him first. The lackeys then remarks that they don't have to help Jin either. Ja falls silent for a moment, then chuckles to himself, and further states that he had no choice but to help him since his sister was kidnapped. Back at the hideout, Jin makes his grand entrance. The lucky leader asks who this guy is, while Yona is stunned to see him. Diane is also shocked to see her brother, and when she mentions this out loud, the mafia boss overhears and realizes Jin is her brother. The boss burst into laughter, nearly losing his breath. He finds it hilarious that he kidnapped a girl, and now her adorable brother is here trying to save her. He finds the whole situation quite amusing. Meanwhile, Jin turns to his sister and asks if she's okay. Daeon starts to cry, her tears streaming down, as she begs her brother to just get out of here. Meanwhile, Fiona is heartbroken, seeing these two siblings dragged into this mess because of her. She shouts at the lucky leader and offers to cooperate, and tells them to let everyone else go in exchange for her cooperation. The mafia boss snaps back, asking why he should do her any favors. Yona falls silent, realizing she doesn't have much leverage. Sokju, battered and bruised on the ground, watches Jin with a mix of admiration and amazement. Despite the tense situation they are in, Jin doesn't seem to flinch. Finally, the lackey leader orders his goons to take Jin down. He says they've already given him enough time, and it's time to finish this. The lackey steps forward, dagger in hand, ready to take down Jin, but before he can make a move, Jin quickly deflects the attack, grabs the lackey's wrist, and drives the dagger into the lackey's own chest. The mafia boss is utterly stunned by this turn of events, and Yoju watches in shock as well. Dion is also blown away by the sight of her brother's skill, and her brother quickly tells her to close her eyes. The girls quickly comply, shutting their eyes tightly. Jin then slashes the lackey, leaving deep bloody gashes across his body. Blood splatters everywhere as the lackey collapses to the ground, covered in his own blood. Yona is still trying to process what just happened, because it's all too overwhelming for her. Meanwhile, Sokju is left in absolute awe, realizing Jin isn't just swinging his knife around aimlessly. Instead, he is expertly severed the lackey's muscles and ligaments to neutralize him. The mafia boss is also quite amazed to see this, and comments that he doesn't seem like a brother at all, but more like a bodyguard. Jin keeps advancing toward him, and the boss retracts his previous statement quickly. He admits that Jin must be more than just a bodyguard, because no ordinary kid could wield a knife like that and maintain such a cold gaze. He then brushes it off, saying it doesn't really matter, because he's still planning to kill Jin anyway. He swings his dagger at him, but my guy quickly ducks down with a Godspeed, and the boss keeps on swinging his dagger left and right. As the mafia boss lunges at Jin with his dagger, Jin easily blocks the attack with one hand, and swings his own dagger at the boss. The boss, quick on his feet, steps back just in time to avoid the brutal hit. The two engage in a deadly dance of blades, each strike more vicious than the last. But this time Jin's blade finds its mark, slicing through the boss's hand, leaving it temporarily useless. The mafia boss, now in pain and disbelief, demands to know who Jin really is. But my guy remains silent, his expression unreadable, as he prepares for the next round. Without hesitation, the mafia boss charges at Jin again. This time Jin effortlessly grabs his wrist, and with a quick motion, slashes through the boss's other hand. After delivering a few brutal cuts, Jin follows up with a crushing punch to the lackey's face, leaving him staggering backward with a bloodied nose. The mafia boss, now enraged and desperate, grabs a gun and aims it directly at Jin. But before he can pull the trigger, Jin throws his dagger with deadly accuracy. It embeds itself in the boss's shoulder, causing him to wince in pain. Seizing the moment, Jin launches himself at the boss with lightning speed. He delivers a devastating slap under the boss's chin, sending him crashing backward like a sack of potatoes. The mafia leader, now thoroughly beaten, collapses to the ground, his pride and power shattered. The others watch in stunned silence as Jin stands tall, like a total badass, his presence alone making Fiona and Sokju tremble slightly. Jin steps forward, gently telling his sister to open her eyes. When she does, she sees him standing right there, a reassuring smile on his battered face. Without missing a beat, he tells her he's here to take her home. Yona is momentarily shocked by his injured appearance, and places her hand over his wounds, asking if he's okay. Jin, with a warm smile, reassures her that he's fine despite the injuries. His calm behavior and comforting words make her emotions overflow, and she starts to cry uncontrollably. Jin does his best to comfort her, his own heart aching to see her so upset. Yona is deeply moved by the compassion Jin shows for his sister, observing them with admiration. The next day, we are at SW Seoul Medical Center. Jin sits quietly in the corridor, his handsome face drawing the attention of passing nurses. His phone buzzes with a message from Jae-young, who's curious why Jin isn't at school. Jin replies that he's got an errand, and as he checks his messages, he sees his friends excitedly discussing their hangout and teasing him for missing out. Jin smiles as he reads his friends' messages. Feeling a warm connection despite missing out, he leans back in his seat, letting his gaze drift around the corridor. His eyes fall on the room across from him, marked with a sign that reads Psychiatry Department. The scene transitions to later that night. After Jin's intense battle with those Goonies, the police and authorities arrive at the scene. They round up all the criminals present, and doctors begin tending to Jin's sister. Yona approaches Jin and tells him that he should take his sister to the hospital, and promises to take care of the bill. Jin looks puzzled and asks why, given that his sister seems to be unharmed. Yona explains that, even though Dion doesn't appear injured at the moment, she may have sustained unseen injuries. The trauma of the situation is significant, and she emphasizes that it's crucial to ensure Dion gets thorough medical attention. She also mentions that she recently discovered Gisu and Hoojin Kim had been harassing Dion, and while she's relieved they've been penalized, the resolution for the victims is still incomplete. She further explains that speaking with a counselor could be beneficial for Daeon after the traumatic experience. This is why we are waiting outside a psychiatrist's office, rather than an emergency ward. As Daeon exits the room, she approaches Jan and asks if he's been waiting long. Jen reassures her that he just came here a few minutes ago. He then inquires about what the doctor said. In response, she explains that there's nothing serious to worry about. She will need to attend sessions once a week for a while, but overall she's fine. Jin also shares that his own injuries are minor, just a few light bruises. The girl also let out a sigh of relief. She is relieved that he's okay. Jin's mind drifts back to how she was so emotional after being bullied. A tough reminder of everything she went through. She calls out to him, and he flashes her a smile. Asking what's up, she just smiles back and says she forgot for a moment what she was going to ask, but inside her head, we can tell she's hesitant to bring up her question. The scene shifts back to earlier, when the doctor was checking on her well-being. In the background, she overhears soldiers talking, completely amazed that a kid took down most of the kidnappers on his own. It just doesn't make sense to them. At that moment, Dion is just as stunned by what the soldiers are saying. She's curious about how Jin can fight so well, and what his life was like before coming back to Korea. But she can't make herself ask her any of these questions. As they walk down the corridor, they run into Yona the moment Daeon spots her. She lights up with happiness upon seeing each other. Yona quickly asks her about how the therapy went. Dion says it went well and mentions she heard Fiona covered the bill for her treatment, so she tells her she really didn't have to do that. Fiona waves it off, saying it's no big deal, and reminds her friend that she's the one who got her into this mess. She then apologizes to her sincerely. Dion laughs it off, saying she's already apologized plenty besides. Fiona herself was a victim too. That's when Jin notices a massive bodyguard standing behind Fiona, with a seriously intimidating look on his face. Despite the intense stare he is giving our boy, Jin remains totally unfazed. Fiona then turns to Jin and asks if he's had his checkup. Our boy quickly says yes, and Daeon chimes in saying she had to drag him there. He only agreed to go after she threatened not to go to the hospital herself. If he didn't, Daeon then asks about Sokju, and Yona confirms he's in the same hospital. Daeon appears really eager to see him, and decides they should stop by before leaving. Even though she is excited about the visit, we can tell Jin's feelings are less clear. Still, they end up visiting Sokju and Daeon. Make sure to thank him for saving her from the blade. Sokju is a bit startled by her sudden gratitude and stutters, saying it's no big deal. She then asks Sokju if he's feeling better, and he replies that he's indeed feeling much better now. Meanwhile, Jin isn't too happy, seeing his sister getting cozy with Sokju. He just stands there in silence, clearly uncomfortable even. Yona and her bodyguard notice that Jin seems to be troubled. Daeon then hopes Sokju recovers quickly. With that, they decide to leave. Yona waves them goodbye, and they walk away through the main door. Once they're gone, the bodyguard is deep in thought, remarking how hard it is to believe that someone like this seemingly scrawny kid could take down a bunch of people at once. It's just unbelievable. Yona chuckles and admits she's pretty amazed herself, but she isn't sure if it's something that would even surprise a pro. Like the bodyguard shrugs and says, it's not just about the kid beating up a group of guys, because there appears to be something way deeper about our boy. The bodyguard explains that our boy quickly and quietly neutralized over 10 guards, which is no easy feat. Even a trained pro would struggle to do that without some kind of backup. What's even more mind-blowing is that he didn't kill any of them. He just made them unfit for combat. And judging by the cuts on the 2 men found in the cargo container, his knife skills are insanely advanced. Especially considering those guys were retired soldiers, not just a bunch of common thugs. He wraps it up by saying that, based on Sokju's report and the state of those thugs, it's pretty clear that Jin Yu is a highly trained pro with a ton of combat experience. Both Sohu and Dion are completely blown away by this. A while later, we catch up with Dion and Jin. Dion quickly apologizes, feeling really ashamed that she always seems to need his help. Jin tells her she doesn't need to apologize at all, and that he should be the one thanking her. Dion is startled to hear this, and Jin continues saying he understands what it feels like to have a family now. You see, it is for the first time in his life. He put someone else's safety above his own, without any calculations. Something he'd never experienced before coming to this country, so he's starting to get what family really means. We then see the same woman with short black hair again, and I will say it once again, she's likely Yona's sister, and she looks utterly distraught that Yona was rescued safely. The reporter details that there is suspicious rumor going around. He elaborates that, while Sokju played a key role in the rescue, the exploits of another student who accompanied him were even more extraordinary. She asks how that's possible, and the reporter responds that even the chairman has taken an interest in this student, and we already know that this student is our boy. Of course, the woman is shocked and wonders if these rumors might actually be true. We see Jin once again doing some hardcore pull ups. As he works out, his mind flashes with images of the people he fought that day, just as he's lost in the intensity of the exercise. Dion knocks on the door and mentions that she's brought some fruit. While Dion munches on the delicious fruit, Jin arrives and quickly asks his sister how she's feeling. She responds that she's already answered that question 1,000 times, and she's fine once Jin sits down. He notices something on Dion's mind, so he asks her what's up. That is when she assures him that she does not hate him just because she saw him fighting and beating those guys brutally. She claims that it doesn't change how she views him. After all, he did all this just to save her. And she won't ask him about his past either. Daeon then gets somber, saying she was never able to tell Grandpa about any of the bad things that happened at school. She just wasn't ready to share it with him. But now she feels more relaxed, as if she can open up about anything. Suddenly her phone rings. It's Yona on the call, so she grabs the phone and heads to her room. While still on the call a while later, we see Yona sitting in front of Jin, who quickly tells him to take a seat as well. Jin sits down and asks why she wanted to see him. Yona explains that she wanted to apologize for putting Dion in such a dangerous situation. Even though she's already apologized before, she wanted to say it to him personally. She explains that Sokju will also come to apologize in person once he's better. She also wants to thank Jin for saving her as well. Jin makes it clear that he only went to rescue Daeon, not Yona. She shrugs, saying that it doesn't change the fact that she was saved thanks to his intervention. Once she's finished, Jin asks if there's anything else she wanted to say. Yona admits that she also wanted to let him know that they will stop investigating his background, so she is hoping that he is not too mad that they tried to dig into his past. She then lets out a sigh, and explains that she couldn't ignore the fact that all of his documents were forged. After a recent kidnapping attempt in America, it raised some red flags for her. She's been in many tough situations since she was little because of who she is. She says that although they never figured out the truth behind his fake records, she won't be investigating it further. Jin starts to leave, saying if there's nothing else, he'll be on his way. Yona looks startled and asks if he could spare a couple of hours because her grandpa wants to meet him and thank him in person while Jin is heading back. He replies that there's no need for that, since he wasn't there to rescue her in the first place. Yona falls silent and Jin heads home. Walking down the dimly lit, gloomy alleys late at night, as he walks, we see a familiar person over that street. As the scene zooms in, we see that this is one of Mr. Cha's lackey, who has been brutally shot in the gut, and it does not take long for our boy to recognize who this man is. The man is barely holding on to his life, but makes sure to start berating Jin, blaming him for putting his gang in danger. He explains that they were already struggling after Jin exposed the Kim family. Then their boss also helped our boy by tipping off the location of the Gusung cartel, which stirred up trouble between the Gusung cartel and their gang. Mr. Cha's turf is now under attack. His friends and lackeys have already been killed, and the Gusung cartel leader made sure to personally visit Dushik Cha. When Go-Young finally faces off with Cha, he throws a verbal jab, asking why he doesn't just give up. Before making a fool of himself in front of his men, Cha responds with a jab of his own, pointing out that he's already sent most of the crew on a weekend off. Yet Go-Young brought his entire platoon of lackeys. Then another guy in a coat chimes in and tells Cha that he really shouldn't have stirred up trouble by messing with the Kim family, and when it was not enough, he tipped off Go-Shang and his men recently. Our gangster throws another brutal jab, and this time Go-Shang himself loses his cool, and he is going absolutely bonkers to what just Cha said. He furiously orders all his lackeys to charge at Cha, and the gang rushes at Cha like a pack of wild dogs, ready for a fight. But our beloved gangster isn't just any weakling. He definitely ducks, letting a punch zoom past over his face, and retaliates with a devastating blow that leaves his attacker reeling. Another lackey tries to swing at him, but ends up taking a brutal hit right under the chin, crashing to the ground in a pool of blood. Gosen grits his teeth in frustration, while Cha continues to drop lackeys as if they're mere flies. Suddenly, Cha takes a brutal jab with a stick from behind. He groans in pain but quickly recovers, throwing a punch in return that sends his assailant crashing down for the count. Even though Cha manages to take out a bunch of guys, the sheer number of lackeys is overwhelming. It's clear that despite his skill, he won't be able to take them all down like this. Our beloved gangster takes his stance, knowing he's up against copious amounts of people, and is furious that Go-Sung brought so many guys, when he knew Cha does not have most of the men in the club. He can't help but smirk when he thinks about our boy, and wonders if he has saved his little sister by now. With the speak of the devil, Jin arrives outside the club. The lackeys standing guard tell him to get lost, but Jin isn't about to take orders. He delivers a brutal kick to one of them, sending him crashing to the ground, and leaving the other two speechless at Jin's audacity. He then dismounts from his bike, and the two remaining lackeys try to take a swing at him, but Jin effortlessly grabs one's hand and delivers a devastating smash to his face, leaving blood splattering everywhere. The remaining lackey tenses up at the sight and ends up taking a heavy kick to his gut. With both goons taken care of, he moves further into the club, only to find a brutal scene of dead bodies. As he advances, a group of arrogant thugs orders him to leave, but our boy remains unfazed and keeps walking toward them. One of the thugs steps up yammering some nonsense, but my guy quickly silences him with a single blow, sending him crashing to the ground, and leaving the others utterly terrified. Despite their fear, the thugs recklessly charge at him, and our boy begins to deliver blows, taking them down one after another. The scene switches back to Gangster Cha, who is now exhausted. After knocking out a bunch of thugs, Go-Shang is absolutely livid, unable to believe that Cha is holding his own for so long by himself. On the other hand, Go-Zong's assistant feels a sense of relief that they only attacked Cha while he was alone. Otherwise, it would have been a massacre. More lackeys charge at our gangster, but he quickly takes out the one in front of him before he can fully move around. He receives a devastating punch to the face, Cha responds in kind, delivering a powerful punch back with equal force. At this point Cha is barely hanging on. Even Go-shan reluctantly admits that he is a tough nut to crack and deserves praise for his efforts. However, he makes it clear that Cha looks like he's at the end of his rope and should just give up now. They'll make it worth his while. Cha spits out a mouthful of blood and asks why he should do that, wiping the blood off his face. He decides he's going to finish what he started. No matter what, we can tell that the big cheese is not impressed by Cha's gutsy display, and the swarm of lackeys surrounding the place are visibly shaking to hear his bold statement. Suddenly, there's a commotion at the entrance, with the lackey screaming their heads off. Go-shan, bewildered, asks what the hell is going on and why his men are screeching like dogs. They turn around, initially seeing nothing, but then they hear footsteps. Out steps Jin. The entire crowd of lackeys is stunned to see a kid in their midst. Cha is equally shocked to see him and quickly asks what the hell he is doing there, to which Jin casually responds that he's just there to return the motorcycle he borrowed. Well, Cha was literally not expecting to hear this kind of crap while they are surrounded by death itself. Meanwhile, Go-shan's assistant sneers once he realizes that Cha knows this kid. So he promptly orders his lackeys to take Jin down. As well, the lackey proudly complies and begins to walk toward our boy, as if he is about to scold the toddler. Cha then tells them that it would be better if they just leave him alone, but the assistant insists they can't just let Jin go, since he's seen everything. Cha snaps back once again, saying they should pray to God that Jin feels generous enough to let them go, not the other way around. The assistant has no clue what this stupid head is yammering about, but he soon gets a wake-up call when Jin takes down one of his guys with a single punch. Our boy then follows up with a kick that cracks another lackey's leg and a headbutt to another, sending him sprawling. One of the thugs tries to swing a bat at Jin from behind, but Jin quickly grabs his hand and delivers a brutal smash to his face, leaving him bloodied. The back clatters to the ground. Go-shan is completely blown away by Jin's display, and Cha just smirks, saying it's their fault for not listening earlier. He adds that even though Cha himself is tough, he wouldn't stand a chance against this kid. The big cheese simply commands his lackeys to take Jin down, and they quickly charge at him, but as usual, Jin effortlessly takes them down, making them look like amateurs in the process. Growing impatient, the big cheese shouts at his lackeys to stop letting a little punk beat them. But just as he's about to make another command, he suddenly falls silent when he sees Cha charging at him. At this point, Go-shan is pretty sure things are about to get even messier for him. Shortly after, the big cheese and his lackeys are all on the ground, looking like they've kissed the dirt, while Cha slumps back utterly exhausted. Jin strides over to him, and when Cha looks up, he sees the wreckage of the fight. People scattered around like discarded wrappers, with Jin standing triumphantly. Jin starts heading out, casually saying that Cha has now paid his dues. Cha is shocked and still trying to wrap his head around how this kid is so fixated on the same bullcrap. After all this, he then asks if Jin saved his sister. Jin calmly replies that he did, and it's all thanks to Cha. The next scene shifts to a hospital room, where one of Cha's lackeys suddenly jolts awake. As he looks around, he spots Cha on the other side of the room, all patched up but clearly still in rough shape. The lackey is stunned to see his boss there, and Cha quickly tells him to stop calling him boss. While they're in the hospital, confused, the junior asks how his boss ended up here. Cha casually mentions he got roughed up and just took a cab to get treated. The lackey then inquires about Ghost Young and the rest of the lackey's jaw. With a nonchalant shrug, says he took care of them all. The junior simply can't believe it and calls this BS, prompting the senior to get a bit annoyed and asks why his junior thinks he'd lie. The lackey suggests it's probably because he is too embarrassed to admit he got beaten by Go-sung. Cha then asks if he happened to have met Jin yesterday. The junior perks up and confirms that he did indeed meet him. He further explains that he got ambushed by the enemy team while he was heading out of the club, and after getting brutally wounded, he found our boy and yelled at him. He charged at Jin out of anger, but after receiving the first hit, he fainted and doesn't remember anything else. The boss explains that Jin probably knocked him out to get him to the hospital. Cha then continues saying that inside the club, he was overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. That's when Jin showed up, took them all out in seconds, and then told him he'd paid his dues, before simply walking out. The lackey finds this absolutely admirable, and thinks it's really badass. To say the least, the senior agrees, acknowledging that Jin is indeed quite impressive. The lackey then asks his boss if he has any clue who this kid really is. The senior points out that Jin claims to be just an average teenager, so he figures they'll have to take his word for it. In the next scene, we see a football heading straight toward Jin, and he catches it effortlessly. The referee immediately announces it as a handball, leaving everyone on the playground absolutely shocked. His friend, visibly annoyed, reminds him that he's not supposed to grab the ball, because he's not a goalkeeper. Jin is confused about why he's getting an earful, apologizes anyway. Suddenly, the bell rings and Jin's friends call out to him, asking if he has time to hang out, since today is the only day Young-chan doesn't have lessons after school, and they're planning to do some gaming together. Jin tells them to go ahead, and that he'll meet them at the location later, because he needs to walk his sister home first. His friends are a bit bewildered, and ask if he started to babysit his sister again. Jen explains that she's not feeling well lately. Blondie decides to save a spot for Jen, and meanwhile, Dion is preparing to leave her class. She's thinking about making kimchi stew for Jin, because he loved it the last time. However, she's unsure if he can handle spicy food, so she's considering making a milder soybean paste stew instead. Suddenly, she hears a buzz of excitement from the other girls in her class. They're all gathered by the window, swooning over Jin. Some find him hot, while others are hoping he'll become their boyfriend. The girls even turn the day on, and ask if her brother is dating anyone. Dion is caught off guard by their dripping enthusiasm about her brother, so she hesitates, and then reluctantly says that he mentioned he's not dating anyone. As the ladies dash back over the window, Dion smiles faintly, clearly pleased that her brother is well known among the girls. Walking outside the school, she wonders why Jin doesn't have a girlfriend, and if he might not be interested in girls at all. Suddenly she hears some voices nearby, and discovers that it's Jin with his friends. Startled, she quickly tries to greet them as politely as possible. One of the more bashful lackeys blushes at her cuteness, and just waves in response to her greeting. The boys decide to head off to the game room, hoping Jin will meet them there once they're gone. Dan asks if Jin is hanging out with his friends. He confirms that he is, but adds that he'll stop at home first. When she asks if it's because of her, Jin explains that he just left something at home. But she still insists that she can walk home on her own, since it's still bright outside. However, Jin claims that he really needs to pick up something he left at home. She then points out that he doesn't need to go out of his way for her, just like she told Yona when she offered to have security escort her. All she wants is to lead a normal life. Jin stays quiet but agrees to her request, saying he'll do as she says, though he suggests they still walk home together. From time to time, Daein pouts, saying he worries too much, but Jin explains he's not just worried, he actually enjoys their walks. In the end, she finally agrees to keep walking with him. As they're walking, Jin suddenly stops when he spots that same woman with black hair, which we suspect to be Yona's sister anyway. She greets Jin, but he doesn't bother to respond to her greetings. Meanwhile, Dion is just as clueless about the woman with the black hair. The woman then pretends to notice Daein for the first time, puts on an exaggeratedly concerned look, and says she must be the one who went through so much because of Yona's abduction. Dion is seriously confused by now, and asks who she is. The woman introduces herself as Fiona's cousin, and says she's here to thank Dion for helping Fiona, and offers to treat her to dinner if she has some time. Jin flatly refuses, explaining that Fiona already thanked him personally, so there's no need for this stranger to go out of her way. The woman is bewildered by his bluntness, but tries to continue the conversation, saying she also has a proposition that could benefit both of them. Once again, Jin firmly declines, saying he's not interested. He then just starts to walk away, leaving this arrogant woman absolutely fuming. But before he's completely out of sight, Dion makes sure to bow her head and give her one last polite nod. Meanwhile, the lady is seething with rage, and her guard asks if he should bring him back forcefully, but the lady says no. It seems her ego's been bruised more than we thought, and she's practically boiling over with anger. Next up, we're in the gaming room, where everyone's glued to their TV screens, while they're all deeply immersed in their game. Young-chan decides it's time to take a dump. As he's heading down the hall, he accidentally bumps into a cocky punk. This guy immediately starts threatening Yang-chan, barking at him to watch where he's going. Yang-chan, poor guy, is practically shaking and stumbles out an apology. But Mr. Cocky isn't done. He's about to slap Yang-chan across the face. Just in the nick of time, Jae-hung bursts onto the scene and saves his friend from getting slapped. Jae-hung strides over cockily, telling the cocky punk to get over it, because there's no need to make a scene. Over a little shoulder bump, he quickly spits out the lollipop he was sucking and locks eyes with the punk and tells him to not take them for a bunch of goddamn scaredy cats. The punk's nerves are clearly rattled by Jae-young's deadly glare, and my guy continues to stare him down and demands this crazy punk why the hell he is staring. Once the punk is thoroughly intimidated, he finally walks off with whatever pride he has left. Jae-young lets out a puff of air through his nostrils, looking pretty pleased with himself. On the other hand, Yang-chan still appears to be in shock, watching his friend and reflecting on the turn of event.